Hey, what's up? What's up? What's up? And welcome to the Binge Worthy podcast. This is the second season with host G. Oliver and myself, Nate. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, man? I'm glad to be back. Glad to be back. What's going on?
Yeah. So we had a great first episode to season one. It was a
Yes,
tribute
Lord.
to Cicely, Tyson. Thank you for everybody who tuned in. Continue to like, share, and subscribe to the Binge Worthy podcast page on Facebook. Of course, you know we're on YouTube. You can subscribe and like and push the little bell. Click on the little bell so you can get a notification when we are live. This show comes on there's a new episode every Tuesday at 3 p.m. So definitely stay tuned in, stay locked in for that. Continue, like I said, like, share, subscribe, and send us your picks. If you have any movies that you wanted to see us review, definitely hit us up. We have a great second season coming up. We have some surprise guests that will be joining us throughout the season. And thanks to everybody who made the first season and watched and shared and liked. And this season is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to keep the themes going. We're currently in February, so we're talking about Black history and love and all that. So
Everything
that
black.
everything black.
Everything black for February.
Everything black. So we have a couple movies today, and today's theme or topic rather is complicated love. So the films that we have today that we're going to talk about deal with a difficult type of love. The first two were ones that we talked about, first three are ones that we talked about last season, but we're going to talk about it in a different type of way with the kind of the underlining love theme. So how you been so far this year, sir?
Happy New Year to everybody. I've been good, man. I've been good. But listen, before we get started, I did want to say something that I think needs to be said. So as our listeners, those who tune in week to week probably know I was absent for episode 1 of season 2. And I really went back and forth with myself, and then I saw something that made me realize that maybe the reason why I wasn't here really should be addressed, right? And since it's February, it's about we talking about love. It's Black History Month. We talking about love. Okay, so let me start here. I was not I was not present for the last episode because I had nothing to contribute to the conversation. The reason why I had nothing to contribute to the conversation is because it dawned on me that as I was getting ready to start preparing myself for episode 1, and I didn't have a whole lot of time because of the switch, the decision to switch up the format.
Yeah.
And then with her passing, being unexpected and wanting to honor her in that first episode, so there wasn't a whole lot of time. But I was really taken aback and ashamed of the fact that although I am very familiar with Cicely Tyson and I absolutely knew who she was, I did not have much wealth of knowledge about her actual work.
Yeah.
I knew her in name. I could pick her out of a lineup, and I knew that she was very important to Black people. That's about it.
Well, I think,
well, hold on. Let me finish, because so that was the first concerning thing, was that I, who am a movie lover and particularly a lover of Black films, and I was looking at some of the movies, Nate, that you had selected, some of the movies and works of hers, and I really had seen none of it, with the exception of Roots, right? And that bothered me. And it didn't really bother me that much, but it bothered me enough that I was like, wow, like this is one of our legends, right? And I don't know if it's because she's a woman, because obviously, like, I've seen Sidney Poitier films, right? Like Cicely Tyson is she's before my time, obviously, but so are a lot of other actors, right? And I started really thinking about it, and I'm familiar with the body of work of a lot of our men, right? Our black men who were early pioneers of film and television and theater.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was Cicely Tyson, and it kind of brought it to the forefront. It's like, well, how many other African American women, right, are you just completely in the dark about, as far as other than knowing, that who they are?
Yeah.
And so like one of those things that, like, it bothered me, but I wasn't going to like press on it. I was like, I didn't feel like I had anything to bring to the conversation, so I was like, I'm gonna just let Nate handle this, because I know and I know that you're wealth of knowledge. But then a couple days ago, someone posted on Facebook, a black woman posted on Facebook about her post said, she was commenting that her timeline, that there were no men on her timeline really giving tribute or recognition to the passing of Cicely Tyson.
Right.
And that made me realize, I was like, oh shit, this might be bigger than just my ignorance. So I just wanted to take a moment to say to any of the black men out there listening to our show, we got to give the flowers while they still here. And a lot of times that's really just recognizing and paying attention to our ancestors, to those of the opposite sex. And I think that's important, right? Like, it really bothered me when I realized that I couldn't really sit down and talk about any film starring Cicely Tyson. And then to know that there may be other larger groups of black men out there who might be just as unfamiliar with her work as I am. And that's a travesty, and we really need to change that. So I just want to take a moment to say that, because I know that I'm going to be going back and watching her work. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm caught up to speed with other performers that I may have overlooked, or just for whatever reason, I can't even explain why. But I think it's something that really needs to, I'm certainly going to address it. And I would hope anyone listening in who finds themselves in my boat, will take the initiative to address it as well.
So everything that you said, I completely understand. And personally, I can't really understand why someone like a Cicely Tyson doesn't get more recognition. And it's not a knock to Tyler Perry, but I don't want her legacy to be fall from grace. I don't want that to be her legacy. I don't want that to be what this generation knows of her. And it was kind of the conversation that I had with you and just in general with people when I was talking about starting this podcast. And for that reason, I wanted us to choose films and TV shows and eventually plays and such that depicted people who don't get the airtime, that don't get the the recognition until they have either fallen from grace, for lack of a better phrase, or they've passed away. And that's when we fill the timelines up. Like, right now you can see less and less people who are talking about her, and less people who are, sharing their pictures of her. And I don't like that. I never liked that thing where when someone dies, everybody's timeline turns into a memorial. And then, like a regular week of a funeral, after that week is over, we don't hear about it anymore. I grew up with a great grandmother, so the types of movies that Cicely Tyson did, I had to watch them. It was no other choice in the house. What channel we were going to be watching? But I do understand what you're saying. But at the same time, I for someone who has children and working with children, I would want this type of platform to not only inspire both of us, but other people who work with children and don't have children, to dig in those crates a little bit more and utilize what these streaming networks and YouTube is offering us is the opportunity to watch these things. And that's what this pandemic has helped me to rediscover a lot of the things that I used to watch. I don't really watch a lot of stuff that come out now. I go back to stuff that like things that Cicely Tyson did, and I'm quite sure you never saw the autobiography of Jane Pittman. Not that
I don't
either.
think so. And the funny thing is,
Right.
like, when I go back and watch, because
Hmm.
that's the one that's on the top of my list to go back and check
Right.
out, right? And
Right.
it might be like, oh, I did see this
Hmm.
when I was young, because I grew up in that kind of household too, right? Like,
Hmm.
we watched a lot of older stuff, and even now I may not be able to remember the name of it off the top of my head or the actors and actresses that were in it, but then when I see it
Hmm.
as an adult, it triggers something, and I'm like, oh, I remember this.
Right.
So it's possible that I have seen some of these things like in passing as a child,
Right. Right.
but I think, and it certainly doesn't apply to everyone. I think for
Yeah.
me, it hit me particularly because I do a show like this, right?
Hmm.
And and I'm an actor, and
Right.
I've always been into film and television, right? So
Hmm.
to realize that, wow, I really, like, it's one thing to see something as a youngster, but then,
Hmm.
like, it was just an awareness of a lack of intention, I guess, is
Right.
the best way to
Wow.
say it, right? Like, I intentionally remember going and sitting down and watching Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night,
Right. Right.
and intentionally familiarizing myself with the work of like a Sidney Poitier, right? Um,
Hmm.
I remember intentionally going back and watching like Richard Pryor stuff that predated me, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but then in this moment with Cicely Tyson, I realized that, oh, I don't think I've intentionally done that with any of our
Right.
like older women. And then
Hmm.
thinking about it in that perspective is like, oh, this might be one of those things where like that needs to be talked about or addressed, because why wouldn't I have? If I like to go back and research like a Sidney Poitier, well, that's about the same time. That's the time that they were both in the business kind of lines up, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I
so
think
so it, it
he's
kind
a
of
little
comes
bit
down.
older than. Well, no, they about the same age
Well, no,
actually.
I don't know age wise, but I think they were working at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
definitely doing their thing
Yeah.
in that same time period. And so to intentionally go
Yeah.
back and look at one and not the other is kind of like, well, what was the difference? And then it just came down to it. It's like, oh, maybe this is a little bit of just, like bias. I
But
went back and I checked out the male actor because
right.
and not
But
and
but
yeah.
identity makes a difference. Identity does make a difference, and that's what you would naturally gravitate to. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, two things. One, Sidney Poitier had a different type of career than Cicely Tyson had. Cicely Tyson did movies that we would consider black movies today, and
Mm.
Sidney Poitier and oh my
He had
god,
a lot
his
of
the other name.
crossover appeal.
Yeah, he did a lot of crossover films, a lot of mixed race films, and Cicely Tyson. A lot of her movies were packed with actors that we deem as great actors today, and it
Mhm.
was all those black movies were just stuffed with black people. So
Mm.
when you go back and start looking at some of them, you mentioned Richard Pryor, and that was one of the films that I picked also, and I chose films that we wouldn't necessarily know. I included Roots in the autobiography of Jane Pittman because those were her two iconic roles. But she
Mhm.
had other movies like I chose Sounder. She had one with Richard Pryor. I purposely left out a lot of her current work where people were rediscovering her as millennials and younger.
Mhm.
But I chose films that would make you like Google the name of it, so you'll
Mhm.
have to look back and see that she's been in over 100 film and TV shows and plays.
Right.
Um, at the over the course of her career, um, and she was just in a play in her early 90s,
Mhm.
Trip to Bountiful, and I included that one as well. But I purposely did that because I had, if you're learning me, I plan when nobody else is planning. And
Mm,
I had already, as I laid out what the second season I wanted it to be. And when it happened, I had to then go back and say, well, how do I do this without it being cheesy or cliche? And even the
mm,
conversation that I was having, in that moment, I turned off the comments because I just wanted to have a out loud conversation about what she meant to me.
mm,
Being a young man raised by a great grandmother, that type of respect comes to me naturally. So
mhm,
to look at and follow a lot of careers, and I followed the people that my great grandmother watched on TV. So it went without saying that I had to do something, and that was just a tip of the iceberg. Uh, and I liken her career to people that we have now, like um, Angela Bassett. Both
mm,
of them have chosen roles that are. Angela has gotten a little bit more advantages than Cicely, but Cicely paved that way for her. But they are both known as the biopic women.
mm,
And both of them did a lot of roles that depicted actual black women in our world. And her career meant a lot to me because her integrity as an actress, as an artist, was number one. She never did roles that made her look a certain way or didn't depict our true story. If you look through her catalog of films, it's stuff that you can watch all her films with your children right now,
mhm,
like, and it not be a sticky issue, or like, and you could have that integrity and watch them with your children, and they're
mm,
all teaching us something. They're showing her in a light that normally we don't get to see in films, because we grew up in a space of time. We're kind of close in age, but we grew up in a space of time where we were show it was only a room for a couple of us. So somebody like Cicely Tyson, it's very easy for her career to just be swept under the rug, like Angela Bassett, who hasn't won any major, quote unquote, major awards. So this, we may be talking about her like that in a few years, but it was, I had to do something, and we have the power to kind of switch around what we're able to do and what we're not to do. And for me, it was just picking films that I know I've seen already, and just showing people that she was more than just a fall from grace. And I
mhm.
or one of Tyler Perry's films that she was inserted in. Before she got like a role in one of his plays, but
Right,
I'm thankful to him that he's
right.
unearthed a
Because
lot
like
of
that's
black
yeah,
actors.
and
Hmm.
that's my thing. It's like when and I think that was what bothered me. So like
Hmm.
if Tyler Perry had been in my shoes and not
Right.
known what I didn't know about Cicely
Hmm.
Tyson, right?
Right.
Then maybe he doesn't cast her in some of, and you can feel,
Yeah.
I know that Tyler Perry inflicts some strong responses from people based on
Hmm.
the quality and just the nature of his work, and I get some of the criticisms, and I
Hmm.
get both sides of the argument. Um,
Right.
but I think that when you think about the popularity that he endured for a good period of time, even up to now, but there was a time where his
Right.
films were extremely popular, and for him
Yeah.
to lift her up in those films, like if you don't have a wealth of knowledge about your ancestors like that, you miss that opportunity, right?
Right.
And while
Right.
I get that a fall from grace is like a separate category on its own.
Right.
But there was some quality films also, or some films that I don't think suffered from some of the issues that a fall from grace did that he did
Hmm.
that she was in, right,
Yeah.
and was able to really bring her to a larger and a younger audience. But
Yeah.
you miss that
Yeah.
opportunity when you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
there's some things that I feel like if you're in a certain realm, you should know. So,
Hmm.
and I think that's why it hit me so heavily, like just being a little bit disappointed by the fact that I had such little reference when it came to her body of work. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah.
But I mean, you're definitely gonna enjoy it, it's definitely family TV that you're going to be watching. The TV shows, the film, and Trip to Bountiful. It may be brought up because now a lot of Broadway shows are being played on TV, and that's a newer one that was done in the last 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else I was able to find on all the streaming networks, or one of at least one of the other streaming
Right.
networks. And a lot of the older work that she did is on, it lives on YouTube.
Mm.
So it's out there for you to be able to see. And I just challenge everybody, with everything that's coming out now that's so edgy, that's so retro. Go back and look at the actresses and the actors that have paved the way as actors. And as an actor, I try to always stay connected to things that preceded me, and that inspired me to want to do this and remember that. And we're not just Felicia Rashad and Denzel Washington, and now I can't remember her name. How to Get Away with Murder. That actress is. We have more pioneering actresses than just the top 5 or 10 that they let play at on the top scale at a
Mm-hmm.
time. So it's really important for us to uphold and make that, because people who make decisions, they look at YouTube views and see how many people are watching these bootleg videos, and they're
Mm-hmm.
watching and seeing, that determines what then gets put on the streaming networks. So it's up to us to really go after our work. It's great
Mm-hmm.
to, all the other stuff that's coming up, all the other movies and TV shows, watch everything. But definitely keep, every couple years or so, go back and watch something that you've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely taken this pandemic time to watch a lot of stuff for the second, third, fifth, 10th time
That's
that
a
I
lot.
haven't, right, that we haven't seen in a while. But we have to do that because that's where the numbers come from. It's a numbers game. So they watching what other people are watching, and now everything is digital. It's nothing for them to pull numbers on a specific actress or a specific person, and make that decision as to what it is. She's been acting up into her 90s, you
Mm.
know, and many people that like they compare her to a Betty White. We haven't seen Betty White on TV in years, and it's sad that they get that comparison, but she worked up until I think her last film was A Fall from Grace, which was not last year, the year before last. So 95, 94,
Mm-hmm.
still working and as a pivotal actress. So that's what this platform is for. We're not just going to just unearth the newness that is film and television, but we're going to dig back in those crates and pull out some films that you've never heard of or never thought about seeing, or one of them things that you would skip over when it comes on TV. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it was a great show. There's, for me, even stuff that I don't know about, I find ways to have a conversation about. So don't ever feel like if it's something that is out there that you can't have a voice for, because you know why you like Cicely Tyson. You just may not know specifically why
Yeah.
like Cicely
No,
Tyson.
it was just, like we've done episodes in the first season where, one of us may not have seen all of the different, like last season we did what, eight
Mhm.
different works per episode. So there were
Right.
times, but the fact that I really couldn't speak to any of it, and because and I understood why you stuck to the earlier stuff.
Yeah.
Um, right. And that was the stuff that I was unfamiliar with. Like I've seen all the
Right.
Tyler Perry movies, right?
Mhm.
So I know about, I know of her work in the Tyler Perry movies. I know
Yeah.
of her outstanding work. Like I think she was nominated for an Emmy every season she appeared in How to Get Away with Murder. Like
Yeah.
she was nominated for that like 5 or 6 times, right?
Mhm.
So that it was that. But then when I started looking at like the Jane Pittman story, the
Yeah.
Sounder, like these were movies that I was completely unfamiliar with.
Right.
And so it's one thing if if you haven't seen one or two of the works that's going to be discussed, but then when you start like all of them, it was like, oh man,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it
I get
definitely,
it.
I was like, it hit me. I was like, oh wow, um,
I definitely get it because I'm like that with newer works right now. you know, I would rather go watch something older because the quality of it is much better to me. And often those things were inspired by, you know, something that we've already had. So I get it. But yeah, that was
So that's why
the
I
point
wasn't
of it.
here. Fellas, for any of the fellas that's listening and like make sure you go back and you know, we've been talking a lot over the last few years about protecting black women and supporting black women and being there for black women and uplifting black women and that's a part of that. And I think when we really think about it, a lot of us will find it. You know, none of us are perfect. We gonna fall short in certain areas. And when we find them, like just hey, like just it's just a simple recalibration. Just like, hey, okay, I've been lacking in this, and I need to get it
Right.
together. And that's what I just came here to say. Like, make sure that you know. I think we get so caught up in the emotion of certain things that we forget that it's the little things that also support these much larger ideas. So you know, making sure you are at least a little bit familiar with some of our great men and women in all areas, and not just superficially is important. So yeah. So what we got tonight? What we working on?
So again,
Complicated
tonight's
love stories.
right. So if you missed the first episode of season 2, definitely go to YouTube or to our Facebook page and you can watch it again. But today's topic is complicated love. So we picked films that deal with love as a forefront or that's kind of the underlying foundation of the film. The first film that we have is a film that we talked about um, last season, but this season we're gonna kind of pull out that theme of love that was in the film. In this film called Moonlight, it won countless awards. We saw great actors like Mahershala Ali. He was kind of the only like veteran actor that was really in it, and Naomi,
Ashton
African actress.
Sanders was,
Yeah,
but you know
Naomi Harris.
he's more the younger coming up
Yeah.
actor. I'm sorry. Um, Janelle Monae was in this.
Mm,
Um, Janelle Monae? So Janelle Monae is a singer, and it was her. There's like two singers that have always really um impressed me on their on screen work. Janelle
mm-hmm.
Monae is one of them. Like I'm really starting to appreciate her as an actress.
Right.
Um,
We
there was
actually have
this,
a episode coming up later in the season where we take singers who became these phenomenal actors
yeah. I think
and
Janelle Monae
female
is one.
singers.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think Janelle Monae is one. She did uh, she did a show about 2 years ago called Homecoming.
Hmm. Yeah,
And the
yeah,
only reason I watched Homecoming was because she was the lead in the second season,
yeah.
behind Julia Roberts as the lead in the first.
Uh-huh.
And so that led to me watching the series. But no, I've been pretty impressed with her work. And there's another actress that I cannot, and it may be that I'm just thinking about Janelle Monae. But yeah, all right, we'll get back to that. But
Yeah, but we do have an
Moonlight.
episode coming up later down the line where, because that's an untapped market. Well, that's a market that is often overlooked because they were singers first, but we failed to mention, you know, how great they really are. But this story of Moonlight, actually, Janelle Monae plays the girlfriend of the gentleman who kind of takes the lead character. Well, he
Sharon.
starts out right. He starts out as Patrick, Mr. Patrick, Patrick DeSille, who we've seen a lot in a lot of Netflix videos lately. And then the older version of him was Trevant Rhodes. I think that's his name.
Trevon, I think it's Trevon.
Trevant
Trevante or
Trevante
Trevon.
Rhodes.
Yeah.
And you see this character uh, kind of build over time.
Yeah,
But
you watch him grow up.
right,
You
but
watch him grow. It's a classic coming of age film.
right.
That is just unique in some of the what it addresses.
Yeah.
It very much touches on love between black men, love between like parents and children.
Right.
'Cause that was a very interesting dynamic and relationship. Because I think it was no question that she loved her son, but the problems that she was dealing with,
Our
I
addictions.
think her addictions were just a little bit too great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then just I think it touches on the general, like a lot in our to be black in America. I think a lot is said, alluded to about the lack of care and love between black people in the community. And I
Right.
think that this movie really depicted one of those instances where that's just absolutely not true, because he was really just taken in by a stranger,
Mm-hmm.
who really became his stand-in mom and dad,
Yeah.
um, for that time period in his life, which I think absolutely, I mean, within the context of the movie, absolutely had an effect on
And
him and who
this
he turned out to be.
right. This film really I think it shocked a lot of people because once the buzz got out there about what the themes and the underlying themes of the movie was, I think the conversation became, oh, here's another movie about gay men, but I think this film forced everybody who saw it to kind of shut up and kind of take a step back and just understand black men when it comes to love and relationships with each other, not even on a romantic level, but on a like strictly platonic or father son or whatever that dynamic is between men. That relationship, it forced a lot of people to kind of examine how they treated people. I know the circle of friends that I have, it really forced conversations out of us that we had never had before. It forced uncomfortable conversations between male friends that I have, or just conversations I saw online with
Mhm.
black men, to really talk about uh, why we don't why we can't relate to each other like our female counterparts. Like, and it really just took us into a space where it forced us to just listen to
Mhm.
each other and hear each other, really. uh
If you watched it,
yeah.
because
And a lot of people
I get the feeling that this movie may have been extremely uncomfortable
Mhm.
for a lot of people, for a lot of men in particular, who probably didn't finish it.
well, that was
It
the weird
wouldn't
part.
surprise me if a lot
Yeah.
of men who started this movie turned it
Yeah.
off in the middle, or half, like a
Right.
third of the way
Right.
through.
But that
Um,
was the crazy part, because we talked about this last season. There
mhm.
was no the agenda conversation or remarks wasn't out there in the promotion of the film. So a lot of people went to the movie theater not knowing what this film
Right,
was going to be about, or
because
subjects
it
that
was
were going to be talked about.
right. Because
Right.
it was marketed as this, like, coming of age story, right?
Right.
And then the early reviews were very, like, the marketing, but then also the early reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody was really mum. Like, there was no indication that sexuality was going to play such a huge role in the film.
For black men, it
Right.
had no, like, it was no.
There was nothing out there that was saying, "Oh,
Right.
this is what you're going to see in this movie." It was really
Right.
just marketed as a coming of age tale about a young black boy with Mashallah Ali, I think, as the big draw,
Right.
because he was coming off of some really
Mm-hmm.
significant performances. I think it was marketed brilliantly, because I mean, I love going into a film and not quite knowing what to expect.
Right.
Um, so no, you're right. There was no agenda talk
Mm-hmm.
in the outset, because no one knew that it even fit the bill,
But
right, for
even
that
even
type of talk.
after it had been out for a while, and a lot of people had seen it, there was a hush. There was a hush, and this was one of the only films of this nature where there was no conversation of the agenda. It I didn't hear it, and I think because the males in the film, quote unquote, looked straight and did not it wasn't it wasn't just sexual. It wasn't about sex. There was definitely parts of the film where that was done. It was very tasteful, but there was no. I mean, we had conversations after and like during the kind of filming of this they came out, but I didn't hear a lot of conversations that badmouth this film, and I think because the characters did not look gay.
I heard some.
That was the biggest one.
I heard some. It definitely wasn't as vocal, as it has been for other films and other works in the past, right? The other, but you know, like, okay, one of the films that we're gonna talk about later, right? In that film, the character goes on a tirade about critics and just perspective in films and works of art. And he actually said in the film, he said something akin to, it was Moonlight so universally accepted because Barry Jenkins wasn't gay. Or isn't gay. And he would, you know, and I wonder if, you know, it's one thing to claim or try to conspirize around an agenda when there's a connection between like the creator or the person behind the scenes who's pulling the strings and the final product. It's a little harder to make that argument when that connection doesn't exist.
But this was, and that's probably what it was, and it probably because it was being critiqued through the eyes of the person who does not have this experience,
right?
Because there were plenty of things in this film, had it been done by a black woman or a black man or a gay person, it would have been ripped apart. Like there was a whole scene in the bathroom with the children jerking off in front of each other. You know, it wasn't that, you know, overt, but we knew what was happening. Everything was very much so. It wasn't like gratuitous nudity, and you know, there was the scene on the beach where he was giving him a hand job, and that was the biggest parts of it. But there were a lot of underlying feelings, you know, that you would. It was told from. You can tell it was told from the perspective of a straight man.
Now I couldn't tell that watching the film. Although I will say that one of the things I noticed about the film was like, I was like, I did recognize that there was something very different about the way that the film approached that aspect of the story versus other things that I had seen. At the time, I didn't really know much about Barry Jenkins, definitely not anything about his sexuality. So maybe what I noticed is exactly what you're saying. The difference that even I understood subconsciously, or not really being able to pinpoint what it meant, but I definitely felt it. I understood it. Maybe that's what it was, is that it was coming from an alternate point of view. And I think it's totally possible.
It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter because it's somebody's perspective.
It shouldn't,
but it does make sense.
Matter, but I do. I mean, but that's the whole thing. Like as a director, you bring your, you know, you take the writing and you bring your perspective to that process. And I think that's something about directing that will always exist. But it was just something about the relationships in the story. For some reason, like I don't know. I just something about the story and the care that was taken in telling this little boy's story.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I mean, you would have had to have been pretty heartless to sit there and start, kind of trashing it over what you think is the agenda, right?
But we've seen it. We've seen stories like this be attempted before, and that is exactly what happened. It's ripped apart. It's not taken seriously because of the director or the writer or the actor that is maybe gay or bisexual or identifying as something other than what is normal and or normalized in our community or our culture. But it's unfortunate that only certain storytellers get to tell certain stories. And no matter how good the story was told, it's still judged from the perspective of who was orchestrating the story or who was leading the story.
In
That
just
is
the
unfortunate.
juxtaposition, can you think of another film that is similar or like at least similar in the themes that you felt like was ripped apart?
Uh, the name of the movie escapes me, but there was a movie that came out a little bit before this one did, starring Monique as this Bible-toting mother who then had a son. It was a nut. The theme of it was a little bit different, but it was still him telling his story. There was another film. And I'm gonna send you a link to it. It was a European film about these two young Muslim boys who were in a homosexual relationship, and and when I remember when that came out, it was such a negative experience because people were bashing them because the religion would have never respected that, but that was the purpose of the film to show that these people have existed
Everywhere,
all throughout
right?
time in every religion and every culture. And those two films are the ones that I know for sure have been ripped apart. But other than that, this story has never been able to be told in its entirety like this. Most times, this theme that was in this film may have been inserted in another movie in some other way. And that character then gets ripped apart for being the gay character because then that becomes the agenda. This was the first time that the movie was centered around this character. Most times it's a part of the film. So those two films that I just named, and we may talk about them at some point, but you would have to see them to understand what I'm saying, and then read a lot of the criticism that those films got. But those two were the one with Monique was more of an independent film as well. It didn't get a lot of it didn't
Yeah,
get a lot.
I gotta check out. When you figure out the name of that, you gotta send it
I'm
to
gonna
me
think of the name. And then the other one, it was Malik and
because you said it came out just before Moonlight.
yeah,
So
that
that must
movie
have been
actually
just
came
before
out.
she went on her strike.
No, it was during the time. That's what.
Okay, all right, that's what I was. Okay,
right. She was never blacklisted. She just wasn't doing any blockbuster movies.
Oh no, I said her strike because I know that she was limiting who she would work with based off of her issues with Netflix, and then
this was before that all the Netflix stuff came out. This was the Netflix stuff has been like in the last 3 years or so, but this was before that. This was before like any talk of Netflix came out, but it was like where it was murmurs that she was blacklisted, but it was before that. But those two films dealt with the issues, and there have been a couple other ones that dealt with the issue of like a gay child and specifically a black male child. But this was the first one where it was in your face, and the storyline kind of crept up to that being it. But the uncomfortable feeling that everybody had around that child is what I speak about.
Well, I didn't have an uncomfortable feeling around the character.
Well, you
It
don't
was
have that feeling in your life,
it was
so you can have
moments. It was moments in the film that I was like, ooh, like as a man, it was just tough to watch. And I don't know if that's because I'm still dealing with, I could still be dealing with full acceptance of like black men, gay men, or just because I don't normally watch, I don't go out and I'm not going to be looking for movies where, like I see men engaging in a sexual manner, right? If it happens, it happens, but it's not something that I would go out and seek. But then at the same time, in the context of this film, by the time, like, I think the first really uncomfortable, where I was like, ooh, like, was the beach scene, right? But I was so invested in the character by that time, and then there was all that foreshadowing, right? Because so for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, the movie is split into thirds, and the first third is him as a young child, probably 11, 12.
Preteen. It was preteen,
Yeah,
and then
preteen,
teen,
and then the second had the second third of the movie is him, high school, like 11th, 12th grade, as a teenager, and then as a full grown adult is the third act of the film. So there's a lot of foreshadowing, right, in his relationships with his friends, and the relationship with Mashallah Ali's character when he asks, "Is there something wrong with me?" Like, there's a lot of foreshadowing about his sexuality. So then by the time, but it's never, I don't know. I just felt like there was a way that Moonlight treated this, that intersection between masculinity and sexuality, because it wasn't who he was. It was like the movie did not focus on his sexuality, right? And I feel like that's
real life, though.
I feel like in real life, that's the larger conversation, right? It's like, for those of us who are straight, I think the question becomes, well, why do we put so much stock into people's sexuality and letting that define them, who they are, right? It's like that shouldn't be what defines anybody.
Well,
right?
It's not what defines anybody. And you're saying it correct. And I think that's why when people looked at this movie and it wasn't rainbow flags and his first gay sex scene, it wasn't that. But this is what happens in real life. And what could happen in real life if you look at people as just people. See him, even though it was a lot of alluding to him possibly
it just wasn't front and center.
But at the same time, it's never a child. It was hard for you to look at that young child that way, because then that says a lot about who you are. And I think because they did it that way, we were forced to see this as a black boy.
Right.
And his sexuality be something that is not even significant, but it's very important to what happens to him, but it's not who he is, because you can't define who somebody is. You can't measure, the quality of a person or any of those things, but we do that. That's done to people.
Right.
Well, it's actually done to people, because then that overrides who the person really is. You kind of quiet those people. And the reason that is always in the forefront is because then when that side is fighting this side, that side has to, my identity is important. I have to show you who I am. I have to prove who I am. I have to, make who I really am recognizable and overshadow what you're trying to make me out to be. So this movie really dealt with a lot of issues on acceptance, a lot of issues on this identity, and what something looks like on face value. You can't look at somebody and say, I know who that person is and I know what they want, because you don't know that. You don't know. And then this film ends in such a weird way, because those two young boys wind up, or it's alluded to that they end up together at the end, which is like a total 360 of what we thought how this movie was going to end.
Right.
And it dealt with just love in a complicated way between him and his family, between him and those adopted family members, and him and the other kids around him, in such a way that it was unlike what we're used to seeing. So
and yet
we
that's
had no choice
probably,
but to root for him.
and yet I also feel like it's probably the most realistic depiction of that set of circumstances, right?
Even
Like
though it's not
there's
the
like,
norm.
right. It's not the norm for what we see on screen. But
Right.
I feel like I feel like it probably hit a lot of very, very realistic beats.
Mm,
Um and you know, the shame that he caught, you know, the flack that he caught from his friends, the flack that he
right.
caught from his mom, right?
Yeah.
And thank God, you know, it almost becomes like as an audience member, you sitting there and you like, thank God he found someone, you know what I'm saying, before he became
Right.
too incredibly tainted, right? Like, thank God he found someone who was willing to, accept him for who he was, right? The full package.
Right.
But also taking the time to try to help him understand, like, you know, at this point in his life, like, why am I so different? You know, because that's ultimately what the conversation was, right?
Yeah.
He didn't even, I don't even think like, you know, he had the awareness that was given to him, you know, through insults and slurs, right?
Right.
But thank God, you almost breathe a sigh of relief. Like, thank God he found somebody, you know, who was willing to accept him and then have real conversation with him about what was going on, right? And like what was really
Right.
happening. Um, but then realizing that it wasn't enough, you know what I mean? Because what you find out in Act 3, and even though the movie ends on this note alluding to these two characters maybe moving on together, um, but you also in the lead up to that, you realize that they've gone now 20, 25 years kind of
Mm-hmm.
living a lie, you know, both of them, right? Like living the life that I guess they felt is what's expected of them as men. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in turn, you know, when they finally do catch up, you find out that, you know, they basically have been living I don't want to say stereotype, but living the expectation. And it's really kind of sad when you get towards the back end of the movie and you realize that, like, damn, they've been sitting here like really just going through the motions, not living their lives the way they want to.
But not being allowed to live their lives. That, I think that should have been what many people take away from this. Look at how we force
Box
people
people in.
to, but then at the same time, uh, scold them for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people have no choice in many cases. You know, it was his life on the line. You know, he had to go to school and deal with things, and that ultimately got him, put him on a path in life that could have ruined his whole life. You
Mm-hmm.
know, him having to fight his way to safety. You know, but you know, this was the one film that was least controversial, but had the biggest kind of cultural connection to where we are specifically right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that was Moonlight. If you have not seen it,
If you
or if
haven't
you've
seen
seen it,
Moonlight, you're just missing
watch
out
it
on great
again.
filmmaking. So
Well, a lot of people
great
decided not to
filmmaking,
watch it
great
after they heard what it
acting,
was about. Right.
great writing, great acting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like get over yourself. If you sitting here acting like you can't watch the film because you know that it involves homosexuality, like, I mean, at that point you just missing you just cheating yourself at this point, because it's a great
Mm-hmm.
film. It's very, very powerfully acted. The direction, the cinematography is beautiful. The
Right.
direction is top notch. The acting is phenomenal. So if that one little aspect of the film is going to keep you from watching it, well, you know, um,
So
it's
the
above
next
me
one,
now.
So we're going to transition into the next film, and this one we're specifically going to talk about the love aspect because this one got us into a little trouble in season 1. But
Did
I
it?
wanted to. It did because we kind of
Did we go
forgot that
off?
we had other. We did, and,
We did. We did spend a long time.
right. But this one, Queen Slim, was a film that came out last year as well, and it dealt with uh the issue between black people and the police and how things can seemingly just turn for the worse and the a decision can just take you down a road that was not intended for. This film starts out with these two being set up on a blind date, and that goes horribly wrong. But we're not going to go off on that tangent again. But we're just going to specifically talk about just the complicated relationship that these two had initially on a date that just went horribly wrong. And most people have seen Queen, so I'm not ruining it for anybody, but it ends with both of them being murdered. And the issue between black men and black women, and this is where our rant kind of went off on a tangent. I don't think we disagreed that much, but it was more so it the idea of our roles as black men and black women, how black men have been relegated to shut up and listen and not being heard, like keeping calm. The idea if she had just kept calm and let him handle it, would it have gotten them to on a run from the law and from from killing that cop? But that was a big conversation that was on social media after this that I remember. And one of the reasons I chose this one the first time was because it just sparked a conversation where I don't think people even in the threads were really listening to each other or reading each other's comments because nobody was listening. And that was kind of the theme of this film. Both of them were in this space where they was put into a blind date platform with each other, not liking each other, not they would not have spent that much time together if they had a choice. But they ultimately knew they had to stay together because it may not have ended for either of them well if they had split up. But this
Well,
is
I
the
think
type of
that was
love that
part
I'm
of
familiar
the
with.
issue that a lot of people had was that a lot of people didn't find that plot point believable.
That they would have stayed together.
Particularly, I remember hearing it from a lot of women that there was just no reason for her to take off and run, And they
But she
always
was a
framed it.
lawyer.
They always framed it in that context of she was a lawyer, she had this career, blah blah blah. Like, why would she throw all that away? And it's funny because I just had a different perspective. I was like, as a lawyer, she probably was the one person who knew why, like, we got to get out of here.
But it's very ironic because
like
as you
thinking
get
that you're
to
a
like,
lawyer and somehow that insulates you from the justice system just is ridiculous.
but we learn once they are on in their travels and they get to her uncle's house that she got her uncle off for the same crime. So that then it
For the
just took
same crime?
another right. He had
She
allegedly,
got him
I
off
believe,
of murder,
no,
right?
well, it was murder, but he
But it
killed her
wasn't
mother.
a police officer.
Right, but
Yeah.
he killed her mother. So, but in essence, it was the same type of murder. But again, because this was a white person and a white officer, it makes it totally different. But why wouldn't you, if you got somebody off for murdering your own mother, why wouldn't you take the chance? But I guess that wasn't kind of the point of it. But the idea of these two finding love and compassion in such a toxic situation for the both of them to be in was the crazy part. But I think that was the normal part for many of us that was commenting on this. we were used to those, and I think the term trauma bonding started trending at this time.
It
Like
did.
both of us
It
are
did.
coming from these. He came from a pretty good household. She was the one who did not have the stable upbringing or the family unit while he did. So he would have had a family to support him throughout this. She didn't. So that's why she made the choice to say, let's get out of here. Let's just run. Let's just, she had nothing to lose and he had everything to lose. Even though she had a career, in essence, in terms of family, and she wasn't connected to anybody other than her job, which she probably really didn't like, and she did it out of just necessity. But he was the one who had the family, who had the support system, but people's experiences really shaped their decisions and their choices in life. And we saw that from the very beginning of this film, and the idea of them then falling in love with each other despite the crazy that they were both in that moment was the dysfunction that many people understood. I think that's what people liked about this so much, because they could understand. I think the whole plot of it was unbelievable, but the toxic nature of their relationship was what people could kind of.
Why do you characterize it as toxic?
Well, it was at the point of the decision that got them into that, not them going out on a date, but once the officer was shot and their decision to then leave, that's when the toxic behavior began. Remember, he was trying to calm himself down and he wanted to listen to music. Well, the music got on her nerves. So then it began to be this ongoing argument from the very beginning
there
of
was
that.
conflict between these two characters that were forced together through a situation, right? Like we see this in every romantic film. Like, you know what I mean? Like the two leads who don't care for each other through
are
forced together through some like this is other than the fact that the particular situation in Queen and Slim hit home for a lot of us as Black men and women, right? Like it definitely struck a chord because of it being so mirrored in what is happening in reality. But outside of that, no different from 90% of your romantic films, right? Like two leads who don't particularly care for each other. They don't always hate each other, but don't particularly care for each other, and probably would have never gotten together of their own devices. But because of this circumstance that has forced them to share space, they start to develop a relationship and appreciation for each other. So when people said that about certain things about Queen and Slim, I was just like, look, y'all need to get out of your own heads, because this is 90% of romantic films.
But because it was so connected culturally and socially,
well, that's what I'm saying. I get that. Like from that perspective,
it was just,
and it was a very authentically
right. But I was just saying, in our romantic comedies, and that's basically what this was.
Well, I didn't say romantic comedies.
I'm just saying, but just the idea.
This is definitely not a comedy.
No, I'm just saying, but the same. They used the same premise for this film. It just had a very controversial undertone, theme to it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It struck close to home.
But there are many films of this nature that still, it doesn't have the heaviness to it. Look at Thelma and Louise. This was very Thelma and Louise-ish to me.
But you know what, yo, like to say that it's not okay, I would be careful about the heaviness or commenting on the heaviness, and I'll tell you why. Because in Queen and Slim, we saw the reversal of the police killings, right? That happen so often. And that's heavy for a Black man and a Black woman, right? That's heavy for us, right? Thelma and Louise started in a very similar fashion. A man tried to rape her or did rape her. I can't remember which one.
That's why I like it.
And she
it was her
killed
boyfriend. Yeah, it was her boyfriend.
And and while that would not be particularly heavy to me as a man, there's a lot of women who may have experienced something similar, or may have been in a similar situation, or even been in a situation where something like that almost happened to them, where they would have felt that deeply when they first saw Thelma and Louise. So I would be careful to say, for us, I think we have to reckon with Queen and Slim on the level that this was a movie for us, that was made primarily by us, and I think it was made intentionally to highlight things that we connect with. I still say to this day, I think Queen and Slim is some of the most, like, there's some of the most authentically black scenes in Queen and Slim that I've seen in any movie. And I'm not even talking about the relationship between the two main characters, but I was so moved by some of these smaller scenes that involve just the people that they would come in contact with.
And interactions.
So the interactions between either them and these people, or these people and the people that were in their space. So the interaction and with the mechanic and the son and them, the bar that they went to where they danced and had a few drinks, and the people knew who they were and let them know, hey, you're safe here. There was dialogue, and there was just stuff in those scenes that was just so authentic to like my experience growing up in like Baltimore City, right? Like that's how we really talk to each other. That's how we really vibe with each other. And I think that we're gonna have a hell of a reaction to all of it, because quite frankly, we don't get enough of it. So I think it's even jarring to us when we find something that is so seeped in authenticity around like what we recognize, whether it's healthy, or as people like to say, toxic. I didn't really find a whole lot of toxicity in this movie. What I found was just two people who were at odds with one another, just because of who they were, right? Like,
but that's what those things.
I don't necessarily classify that as toxic.
But that for me, that's exactly why it was toxic, because often in toxic relationships, it's not something that it doesn't even have to be something that either party brought to the relationship. It's just the dynamic of the relationship, or the circumstances surrounding why we stay together, or why we're together, because at any moment they could have turned themselves in. But I want to focus more on the love aspect of it. It that's why certain parts of it was toxic to me, but because it is often toxic isn't necessarily either person's fault. Like my toxic level in my relationship may not even be my doing. It's just how things are, or why things are. I don't think toxic is necessarily a negative term, but it's a given circumstance. And then when we are together in a unit, it becomes toxic because we are both making choices that are not good for us as a unit. And we're not, and that whole dynamic between and a lot of people just said, if had she just stayed in the car as he asked her to, maybe they wouldn't have gotten to the level, or where it wouldn't have been a movie, possibly. But
I don't know, though. I think that's whack.
Well, I mean,
I think that's whack, because and I'm gonna tell you why I say it's whack. Like, not you. I heard a lot of women say that, and I call bullshit on it, because that's just not how black women are. Like, I don't think any of them would have stayed in the car.
But understand that's where the conflict came back. That's where the initial conflict came back. That was the conversation.
That's arguable. Because how many times have we seen, like, Sandra Bland was by herself. There was no one to get out the car for her.
Right.
Amir Rice was by himself. There was no one to get out the car for him.
Well, minus the situation with the cop. Just the dynamic between the two people. The man and the woman.
Well, listen, I'm gonna just say that. I'm gonna just say how we
trust. Remember, trust was a big issue in that.
Look, I'm gonna just say this to all the black women out there listening. If you see my ass at a car stop and they got me out the car with guns drawn, please come to my rescue. Like I'm just gonna put that out there. Like please don't
that got
like,
her
or
shot though.
at least stop and record. But yo, like we need to stop. Hold on, time out, yo. Like that stop was out of order. And we need to stop putting ourselves. Hold on.
But I'm saying to you, I want to minus out any of the racial issues that was in it. Just the dynamic between the two, because I don't want us to get off on a tangent again. But just the dynamic between them. I understand what you're saying, but I want to focus primarily on their relationship. And there was a lot of they were new to each other, so a lot of these things would have happened because they didn't trust each other. They didn't like each other. It wasn't a romantic situation they were in.
But I don't think any of those things were intentional. I think they were instinctual. And the truth of the matter is this: as a black man, you driving, you see a woman with a flat tire, right? You have the tool, and you have the tools, right? Like you know how to fix a tire. You know how you have the tools in your trunk to fix the tire. Because you have the tools and the know-how, right? Like you see a woman, carrying something that you know is probably too heavy for her, right? And as a man, even if you ain't the strongest guy in the world, like you have the tools to help. And that's just genuinely, I think, how we treat each other, or at least how we should treat each other, right?
I was about to say how
in this particular situation, when you're talking about the issue at hand, that he had been pulled over by the police, like black women are the same way, and black women are much more consistent with it than black men are. I think, like when they have the tools to step in to resolve a situation, like you best believe they're gonna come.
But it's a difference. It's a difference when you are at a distance.
But I mean, all I'm saying is that she was a lawyer, part of right? If anyone,
not a lawyer, but she was in the
tools. No, I'm talking about the stop itself. And
yeah, but I'm saying there's a difference between if you're just driving by and see that, and you are actually a part of it.
I don't think there's any difference.
It's a big difference because she knew how heightened the situation was from the jump. She was there. She was in the passenger seat. There's a difference between if you're riding past and you see something versus you're in it. You're a part of it. And that, I think that was the conversations that I was reading. Like the idea that trust is a big underlying issue in this. And that was really what it was. I trust what I know over what I feel like you're able to do. And that was kind of where the conflict first happened.
I feel like that's natural. I think people were just reading, and I believe people were reading into it.
I think they were reading into it too much. But they were taking their own personal feelings and adding it to it. That's what
I don't know. Like Nate, you and I, if I'm a guy, if I have a legal degree or I'm familiar with the law, and you and I don't think it would make a difference whether I just happen to walk by and notice that a police officer was way out of line with you, or me being in the car. I think if you and I were riding in a car and you got pulled over, and like, am I going to immediately jump out of the car? Like, what's going on? No. And neither did she. I think when she realized that this ain't right, like something is really off, is when she got out the car. And quite frankly, I don't think that has anything to do with.
I'm not disputing what her natural intention was, but I'm saying the dynamic that I'm basing this off the conversations that I had and the conversations that were being had that I was just kind of eavesdropping in. Yeah. And it was more so just a dynamic of him wanting to keep everybody calm and her surpassing what he was doing because it wasn't enough. Or in her mind, it wasn't enough. It wasn't working. So her just overstepping what he had tried to do and just super exceed. Because the moment she got out, that started a chain reaction of events that ultimately got both of them killed. And I think the big question for me in terms of it being a complicated love story, why is trust so hard for us to instinctually have. Because had that been,
I think trust is earned, and
it is, but
I think trust is
you
earned, and
gotta
it's
show
something
me.
that comes with time. Yeah, yo, like I don't know, yo, like
But that's your answer to it. But for me, at some point, you have
well, no,
to,
because
if
I
you're
get
in a
what you're
situation.
asking, and I just feel like, oh God, like there was no trust to be had at that point in their relationship, if that makes sense, right? Like I get what you're saying, and I just feel like first of all, you got to know someone to trust them, and they didn't know each other, right? Like they were just two strangers who ended up in this unfortunate situation. That yes, I will say it most likely escalated because she got out of the car. Although with
And
what we
there's no
know,
right or wrong. There are no right or wrong answers to these or questions to be asked. Really, it's just the and all only questions and answers we could give are what ifs at this point, because there is a difference. As I said, if you're a passenger versus you are an innocent bystander that's seeing this happen versus being in it versus them being on their first date and they were on their way home from the first date versus them dating exclusively for a number of months or whatever. But it does the idea that our relationships as black men and women in general are strained because there's no, okay, let me handle this, okay, let me and after that point there's no trust in. But we start off with absolutely no trust. And that's a problem for us as a community in general. Not just you just meeting somebody, not that I don't think you got my best interest at heart, but just in general, there needs to be some level of trust. Because at that point you're guilty until you show me different. Or you are, not trustworthy until you show me different.
right.
But there's a problem that we all have in general. And it's one of the things that I was just pondering over and even thinking about this being a theme for episode. Just that idea of, as people in general in our community, in our culture, socially, we don't have any trust in each other, like at all. Like just, and we are put into strange situations, whether it be to
We
be
are put
co-host on a
in very
show,
strange situations.
right? And just not having any
But let me
trust
ask
is
you something,
crazy.
yo. Like, do you think that maybe? Do you ever think maybe you asking something that is at its very core a very unrealistic expectation that honestly nobody else has to endure?
Unrealistic, but not
I mean,
impossible.
do Mexicans have trust for each other? Like other Mexicans that they don't know, do they just trust them on the strength that like you're Mexican and I trust you?
Well,
You know what I
I've
mean?
never been Mexican, so I don't know that.
Do Africans have that type of trust where it's like, oh, you're African, I trust you. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like I
but
just
honestly, to answer your question,
Mhm.
in terms of my experience, there may be I don't know you, but when we're put in certain situations that require trust,
Mhm.
I've noticed that other cultures have an easier time with not necessarily relinquishing that type of power, but let me just wait and see. Let me baby step. And for us,
Mhm.
we start off with no trust.
Mhm.
We continue on with no trust. We live with no trust. And the trust factor normally comes as a necessity. When I have no other choice, I'ma still think about a plan B, C, and D before I trust. And that's just been my experience. So I understand it being unrealistic because it's not something that we're used to having or seeing or being, but
Mhm.
it's not impossible. And I'm not saying blindly go into every relationship that you're in with this level of trust, but I mean, come on, like me and you are co-hosts on this show. So,
Mhm.
and you deciding to join me on this show, there has to be some level of trust. You can't just say you went into this blindly beyond you just knowing me. You know, you have situations where in a classroom or in a workplace environment or we in rehearsal, we come into situations with no trust and watch other cultures of people come in there as a blank slate. I'm just meeting you. You know, I'm a give you my trust until you show me otherwise.
Right.
Well, we are the exact opposite, and that's where this theme came from. Episode 2, just our inability. We know where it's coming from. We know our experiences, the things we've dealt with, the things we've seen and heard. Those are the things, or we've been taught, because it could be our parents or their parents' inexperience with trust that then becomes the problem. But for
so
us,
it's generational at this
right?
point. If what you're saying is true, then it's generational.
Right. It has to stop.
But they do learn to trust each other as time goes on throughout the movie.
Because they need to. That's why I just said out of necessity. And even out of necessity, there were still moments where they both reneged on that promise to then trust each other. Until their true trust did not happen until they got shot dead. The moment right before.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I have a different. I just feel like I see what you're saying. I just have a different perspective about trust, what it is, and how it develops.
But just understand this that idea of just not trusting. How has it kept you?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I don't know if I see the example of just not trusting. I don't. You know what I'm saying?
That was just the biggest thing that I took from that. Just our inability,
lack of trust,
as Black men and Black women, to ultimately trust each other. Because he kept saying, "Let me handle it. Just calm down. Let me handle it." And he just kept saying it.
I get that in that particular situation, but I feel like, I feel like that if you're judging it solely off of that really like tense moment, I mean, because everybody comes into it with their own perspective of like what I would have wanted you to do, or what she should have done, what he should have done. But I think that we can't let the tense moments like that define like the whole thing. I based
that trusting off of what the story unfolded.
What about this? After the cop gets shot, right? And he wants to call 911, and she says, "We need to go." What about that level of trust? What about that level of trust right there? It was like,
that's what I meant.
Not see that as a level of trust at that point, where, because I mean, he could have stayed there. He didn't have to leave. He could have. The keys were in the car. She could, look. You want to go? You roll out. I'm saying,
but at that point, it's necessity that we trust each other. Like our necessity. It was the reality of him staying there did not.
I think one of the things that we all had an issue with Queen and Slim was that everybody understood that the running made it worse.
Yeah, well, that's natural. Okay. But how many people run from the law? Like it's going to be, you're making the problem worse by not facing the problem. And a lot of things would have probably been understood, but the fact that they ran, they then became fugitives on the run that were armed and dangerous because this man had been shot. Versus these two were apprehended at the scene of a crime, and then they would have been able to. I mean, whatever possibility. I looked at it based off of what the story unfolded in them, and her lack of a connection with loved ones is what fuels her versus his experience having this family unit that he can always go to. And then that fueled the fire. She only had that uncle to call on that she could halfway trust. He had his family who he knew he was putting into danger by calling them or reaching out to them. But their decision making both was representative of what they had to lose in a situation. And she didn't really have a connection. She wasn't even close to that uncle. She just knew that was somewhere she could go for a moment and just reset and until they think about what's next. But that's why this is an underlying theme of this our lack of trust and in our complicated relationships only makes things worse. It doesn't make it any better. But that was kind of Queen and Slim from that perspective. It was a lot that could have been unpacked in that story in terms of our relationships, but I wanted to deal with strictly their love relationship and how the lack of love.
Just changing gears. Did you buy it? Did you find it believable or authentic that they fell in love throughout the course of the movie?
Yeah, because I saw that level of dysfunction in my life before. Not personally, but I've seen that level of dysfunction before.
Wait,
so
what? You wait, are you what was dysfunctional about it other than the circumstances that they
when you hear me say dysfunction, you're looking at me point a finger at the two of them. Dysfunction was the scenario that happened.
Oh, okay, and that's true. Okay, so that's true because when I hear like toxicity and dysfunction, I'm thinking about the people. And that's just generally.
To be honest, she had some dysfunction in her.
Oh, of course, and so did he.
Right, but he had more. I could tell he was more spoiled and a little thirsty. Whereas though she just was, I don't need nobody to do nothing for me. Until she finds somebody who can tame that instinct in her. Not tame her. I don't want nobody saying I'm talking about taming women, but just tame that instinct that she don't need a man for nothing.
Right.
And then she finds out, okay, this is what I could need a man for, this companionship and, all those things. But when I speak of toxicity or for me personally or dysfunction, that was a dysfunctional relationship that they were in, that they found themselves in or they got themselves in. Like that's dysfunction. They're running from the police. That's not a standard love. But I know that level of dysfunction, people who find themselves in crazy situations and go along with it because it's companionship, it's a level of security. It's we don't have no other choice. I grew up seeing that, so I know that. That's why I could say trust is kind of like a underlying feeling with that. We both know people who got whole families together, who don't love each other, who don't trust each other, but can't seem to not be in a situation together. Like, can't, you know what? This is not good for either of us. Let's just go our separate ways. We know at least one person like that, or a couple like that, but but that's what I took from Queen and Slim. But that's it. Maybe we just have to do one show just on Queen and Slim and just get it all
about. We ain't fitting to keep talking about Queen and Slim, yo.
I'm just saying, but it just seems to be something. But this conversation seems to get heightened no matter what environment you find yourself, because I think that film kind of made a bunch of us think about certain things that we don't normally talk about. So I know for me, it just brought up conversation that I don't normally have with other people. I don't normally talk about trust.
Yeah, I just don't trust people. I just always felt like it was really blown out of proportion. Like, to me, like, trauma bonding, is like I had a effed up relationship with my dad. She had an effed up relationship with her dad, and because we both have unresolved issues around that, we are having issues in our relationship that really result to the fact that we both got daddy issues. Like, that's trauma bonding. Like, if I met my girlfriend on the day that her father died, and that was just a really bad day for her, like that's not trauma bonding. Like, you know what I mean? Like
initially
I just have I don't know. I
said,
think sometimes we take these phrases, we take these words,
but
and
they
we try
mean,
to impose
they
new meanings
mean
on
stuff.
them.
Well, no, because I've used them. I try to be as honest about the terms that I use as possible, and I understand how things are being overused. But they're the trauma of them being put in this situation. You know, that idea, that is what ultimately created that bond. It's not a healthy bond because we're on the run. We're still on the run. So I try to be as authentic about the definition of a phrase or word when I'm using it. So there's no underlying hidden agenda or intention when I use it. It's real direct to the meaning of what it is, real literal to what it means. But I think sometimes things have layers to it. And it's not, for me, just in for future reference, I'm not ever pointing at an individual specifically. It's normally whatever the theme is surrounding them or the conversation. That's where I go to. Because I don't know these people.
I'm not. And like I wasn't specifically talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of these conversations when Queen and Slim came out, right?
Yeah,
I remember like the Twitter dialogue, the conversations that were happening throughout social media around it. I read several of the think pieces about it, and I just think, you know, and like toxicity is another one. And I just think that we're lumping, we're taking something, a broad idea, and we're just lumping a lot into it. That honestly is just normal, everyday, regular shit.
but some people may not look at that as normal. Some people may not be ever in these situations. So let's look at both sides of that coin, because some people just don't
like
normalize
honestly,
it.
do you really believe that?
I do.
Do you really? Because a lot. I'll tell you in my experience, yo. I get a lot of people in the opposite direction. Like, no, you've had 9 previous failed relationships. You don't get to sit here and talk to people about what, like, toxicity. Like, you know what toxicity is because you toxic.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
The ones that you
but
go
my
to
thing
for
is, like,
definition to begin
okay,
with.
so there's toxicity that should, I feel like, be reserved for something, right? Like, if you're gonna have this word, it should mean something, right? And what
But
I'm
everybody
finding
has
is,
a different experience with it,
okay,
so it's not
different
gonna be the
experience,
same.
but even those different experience and definitions should kind of fall into the same category. But what
Not
I'm finding, yo,
necessarily.
is that toxicity for most people is just negative, like
That's
negative
what it
personality
is.
traits that you don't agree with or you don't
And
like.
that's exactly what it is.
All right,
So
that's a
that could be
dangerous road to go down when you want to call everybody who you don't agree with or something, or like something about them that
but
you don't
the
like, to
conversation,
call them
see,
toxic.
but in the conversation, that's when the explanation needs to come out. So
But
that's
how does
the
the word have
conversation.
any? Let me ask you something. How does any word have any power when everybody's definition is valid and everybody got a different definition of what it is?
But I don't think the definition, because you just gave the definition of
What's
it.
the
But
definition of
in terms,
toxicity?
you just gave it. You just said it.
So anything, I can't
had
just say this person got character flaws. Like, why do we need to create a whole new term for
well, that's not a
to
new term
describe
though. Toxic
toxicity?
is not.
The
No,
way
that's not
that
a new
we use
term.
toxic, the way we use toxic in reference to
I think
relationships
you're
is
hearing it
very
more.
new. Is
No, I don't
very
think.
new.
No, I don't. I think it's now people feel more comfortable calling it toxic. People have the
No. Yo, the
vocabulary
word toxic has
and
been
the
around.
verbiage.
It's only recently that it's been synonymous with relationship. The word toxic has never been. It's never been synonymous with
I don't
relationship.
think you've ever heard it. I don't think you've
I
ever
know I
heard
never
it.
heard it. I've never heard it because it wasn't a thing until like a couple years ago. And now everything about a relationship that we don't like is
I
toxic.
think that's but I believe that's the social media effect of it.
That's just what it is,
puts a
man.
blanket statement on everybody.
Social media,
Just
blew it
understand.
up, but that's exactly what it is.
So George, I try my best to be a person that what you see, that's what you see. I don't have to agree with it, but that's what you see. I'm not going to disvalue or take away your meaning of it. We all have the same meaning for these terms, but what happens is my experience with this is not a problem because conversation helps me to understand why you see that way and why I see my way. But because we don't have conversations with each other, we just talk at each other, so we're not listening. So our definitions become very different, but we're talking about the same thing. So when what's toxic to somebody is something
how are you talking about the same thing if the definitions are very different?
But George, the definition.
Like the whole point of communication and conversation and language is that you have solid definitions, so that when words are said, everyone understands what's being said.
You are American, so we know that one word can mean 5 different things and have 10 different definitions to it. But in terms of what this term toxic means, or a lot of these terms that we've been using, depending on your level of experience with the term or comfortable being talked about, it's going to mean something slightly different depending on what you're meaning. The definition at its core,
I would say that in itself is the problem, Nate. But when you start talking about the lack of understanding, the lack of trust, all of those things are tied into the fact that everybody wants to have their own set definitions and meanings for everything. And they want it validated. And you can't validate 100 million people. You can't validate 100 million people's interpretation.
But you can't disvalue somebody because you don't agree with them either.
Understanding that maybe you need to use a better word is not devaluing anything.
It is because
toxicity and toxic have their own definitions that have nothing to do with relationships. And just because you and a group of people decided that that's the word we're gonna lean on.
No, George. Sometimes you gotta let people have what they want. And I'm saying to you, if you look at all these situations instead of judging them, the definition never changed. My experience with that person and that behavior may be different than yours, your relationship, because what is toxic in your relationship may be your husband beats the shit out you. Well, toxic in my relationship is, well, my mate don't come home at night. I don't get beat on, but so that's still toxic. But we're talking about 2 different outcomes. Actions are different. The definition to the word has never changed. It's still the same word. I think the social media effect has blown things up where people are talking about it more. So you're hearing it more. But a toxic relationship is not anything new. Calling it toxic is not anything new. I've been hearing that for a very long time. It's just that I think now we're hearing it in conversation more, and then when we dig down deep into it, you realize, well, this person had this type of toxic relationship and this person had this type of toxic relationship. The types may change, but the core definition is still that. And I am that person. Whatever you feel you've had a experience with this, that's your experience. I may not have had that experience, but it's not up to me to say this is valid and that's not valid.
You can't. It's not an experience, yo. It's a choice. There's no experience that you had that I haven't had as far as relationships go, and there's no reason
different people though.
Two different people. But just admit that, like, yo, you decided to use this word.
I've used that word for a very long time. So a toxic person to me has nothing to do with your definition of what toxic is, because the definition is the same. It's just my experience with this type of person versus because certain things that you deem as normal, I don't think the shit is normal. But I'm not devaluing your experience with it, nor should you devalue mine.
So that's what I'm saying. Let me try to re-explain what I'm saying. So
I understand.
My problem with the general term toxic is because it really is non-specific. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like,
how is it not specific if somebody is telling you what they're
because if I say so if I told you if I told you that I like I broke up with my girlfriend. She was toxic. What would you say?
Well, what happened? I will want you to dig deeper. Normally,
so that's
I think
point.
Your problem
toxic has become this really general thing where we are throwing everything we don't like under that.
But
I'm telling you,
but there are a lot of things that there are billions of people in this world, so everybody is going to have an overlapping or somewhat linear experience than you had. And then because there are a lot of different things that make our experiences similar and different, but we have just as many things that make us different as it makes us similar. But we've had some of the similar. Okay, we've probably dealt with certain things, but
we're lumping everything under the term toxic. In the United States, amongst black men and women, we're lumping everything under the general term toxic.
Because for many people, they have not had that verbiage or that ability to be able to define what they've gone through.
But people have always been like when if somebody was abusive, you just said they were abusive. If someone was a know-it-all, you just said they was a know-it-all. If you said that someone was inconsiderate, you called them inconsiderate. You didn't have to. No, now it's just like all of it is.
Your life has been black and white. Not everybody has had that black and white life.
Black and white. My life has just been realistic. Like no one used toxic until like 4 years ago, and we're lumping every single thing.
But George, you need to open up and understand that everybody has not shared your experience.
And I haven't shared everybody else, but everybody's sharing this experience of throwing toxic out there, like it's just
but many people
to describe what we don't like. Like, oh, I don't like you. You toxic. You toxic. You toxic. You toxic. But we didn't get to the point where, like, literally.
But the part that I'm agreeing with you on is I do think people are using the word, and many people are using a word to describe something that they just don't like.
Yeah, that's all I was saying.
But that's not. And I agree with you, but the problem is also somebody devaluing what somebody else has gone through.
No, so, I don't want you to think that I devalue it. But I think it's devalued itself. Yeah. I think that we have brought it to a place
but the people who are doing it, I don't think outweigh the people who have gone through toxic experience and now have the verbiage to be able
toxic experiences.
But you're saying that they
in a relationship, if you've been, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying
people are now able to define it, but that's not a new term, though, George. I'm telling you
to define those.
I'm telling you that's not a new term. It's not a new term. It's not.
It is a very new term for describing relationships.
For you, it's
for everybody. Like, stop trying to put me in a box. Like, I don't understand.
But stop trying to put me in one. But stop trying to put me in one. I never. But George, I'm gonna say this to you real quick. Don't add words to me if I have not said the words. I'm gonna say that real quick and easy.
I'm gonna say this real quick and easy. You ain't used toxic 5 years ago.
George, I first heard the term in therapy when I was 7. It was first described to me when I was 7. So I've known what this word has meant in terms of relationships, in terms of experiences since a very young age. So the term, I'm telling you, it is not a new term. It's been connected with relationships for a very long time. You just have not had that verbiage to use in terms of the relationship you've been in. You are just starting to hear people saying it. That doesn't mean that I just heard it for the first time.
Right.
And I get what you're saying. I just my understanding then goes beyond that in terms of everybody has an experience. And the definition of the word has not changed. What has changed is time and people having now the ability to call things what they can call it. At one time, we didn't have that verbiage.
People have been calling, and
not really, because many people are in things that they don't even realize they're in. There are many people who have been in very toxic relationships who have just thought this is what relationships are. And now they've been given the verbiage to be able to call something. And of course, when you learn something new, everybody begins to use it, or use it for everything.
It's easier for people.
I think it's made it not necessarily easier, but it's given us a platform to be able to say, okay, this is something that I like and this is something that I don't like. And the word toxic normally is used in situations where something that doesn't feel good to me. You're doing something to harm me and hurt me. And yes, I think there's levels to hurt, there's levels to harm, there are levels to things that I don't feel comfortable doing. But when someone is constantly doing it and don't care whether you don't like it or not, that becomes toxic. That person becomes toxic. And your relationship with that person will become toxic if you don't create that boundary.
Okay.
And that's
So
this film.
I
That's
will
why
agree
this
with
film.
you there. However, I still think that in the larger conversation, the word toxic is becoming a trend that is being overused and is really being used as a scapegoat to just toss in anything that we don't like about a person. And I don't think it's having a
I agree
positive
with
effect
you in
on the
many
overall.
different situations. I've seen it be abused, specifically in situations where there are relationships between men and women. I've seen it. I've seen the term abused, but I think the abuse happens when I keep calling something something, and you don't see my behavior change. So when I'm calling something toxic, but you still see me participating in it, that's when you don't believe the reason behind me using the word. I do think that's the problem. When people's behavior doesn't change and you keep
Well, I
going
think
back
in
to
any
that
relationship, when
person,
you
or
communicating to someone that what they're doing is not helpful or it's harmful to you.
but people have to become aware of that first. And I think a lot of people that you're hearing use that term or terms similar to that, they didn't always have the awareness of what they were in. Like a domestic violence relationship. You hear a lot of women who say, well, that's I saw that happen to my mom, or my mother went through that, or my father did that to my mother. So I thought that that's what was normal. It was a lot of people who felt like somebody punching them was a form of love because they wouldn't be
Right.
that mad at me if they wasn't in love. And then somebody introduced them to that's toxic behavior from you and from that person. So that the word toxic then became a tool for people to use when something didn't feel good to them, or something was physically or mentally hurting them. And I think that your perspective on what that word is changes depending on where you are and your experience. So it is about an experience. And then people learned a word and they began to use it. Now, like you said, everything is toxic, but a lot of things are toxic. A lot of our relationships are toxic. And we just now becoming aware. We haven't even begun to do things about it. We just now at a space where I can call this toxic.
So you feel like the word toxic is just an easier way for people to identify
Something's not feeling good.
something that's not right.
Something this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. And you may not even know what that thing is, but it doesn't feel good. Our relationship don't feel good. I'm telling you, I've used the word recently to describe a lot of my male relationships. The way I feel in a lot of my male on my male friendships and relations, it feels toxic to me because I can see your behavior being reflected on how you treat me or how you respond to me. And I do believe that that's toxic. But I understand the overuse of a lot of phrases and terms within our Black culture, but just understand we didn't always have this power to be able to directly define something or call it what it is. And so now a lot of people are going through purging sessions with their emotions and their feelings, and you will hear the word a lot. I think it's died down recently, but I do understand what you're saying because it has been used as a weapon in many situations versus a tool, versus as a tool. But
I wasn't
that's
even getting into that. Like I wasn't even going to go into the weaponizing of it, which I started to notice does happen. I was more so speaking on the fact that it's become such a general term.
right. It doesn't seem like
it
it has
sounds
a
like it sounds like you understand that, but you see that as a positive thing. And
I mean, it's just like identity.
I'm not sure.
It's just like identity, whatever about sexuality and sexual promiscuity. Right now, we see that being, identity being used, overly used, because for so long people weren't allowed to have a personal identity. It was all about how you saw me, and that's how I was measured and how I was defined. But we know now we can no longer do that to people, and we can't allow other people to do that to us. So now you're hearing a lot of things that have identity inserted into it in some way, shape, fashion, or form, whether it's my pronoun or it's okay for me to show my titties on air because I'm self-identifying my empowerment as a one. Like, it just goes to that point. And, these conversations have to happen because I have to understand what triggers you and what triggers me. But if we don't have a conversation, we don't have an understanding. Because if you talk to many of those people one-on-one, not on social media, you'll understand a lot of them are coming from the same space of not having that authority over what doesn't feel good to them in terms of their relationship with other people. And every relationship is different. Your relationship with me is going to be different than somebody else's relationship with me or their relationship with you. So it's going to be, you will hear variations, but that's the English language. Right. If you look in the definition, there's going to be at least 3 definitions for the word toxic. But that's just the English language. So, and why I didn't want to put Queen of Slim on this, but I felt that was important to talk about it. So the next one is
what She's Gotta Have It.
She's Gotta Have It. Now this is a different type of complicated love, and we're speaking about the original She's Gotta Have It, because I think the newer version of it brought about a different component. It was more, it modernized the problem.
Yeah, I think it was more in line with the so I think just to comment on that, I think the original was like, I don't even want to say it was ahead of its time. I think it was just an honest film, right?
Yeah,
I think
it was.
I'm starting to realize as I get older that what we call ahead of its time is really just stuff that people didn't want to address at that time, but was probably going on for much longer than people were willing to admit, right?
Right.
So when you in think about, specifically in Black culture. But then when you talk about this story, which is really, I think at its core, I would define it as like a woman, a story about, femininity and like women owning their bodies and their sexual power, right? And because of all of those women that came before She's Gotta Have It, right, that probably inspired this film, and then everything that has happened and gone down since, I feel like it put the reboot, as much as I really enjoyed the reboot, because I did, I think it put it at a little bit of a disadvantage, because now you're making this reboot in a time where that's become a much more common thing now. Right? Like,
well, they didn't push the envelope.
Right. Like, where would they have pushed it to? And I'm sure. Say that again.
That, like, the big thing in this one was they made her bisexual. Like, they were able to call something. Whereas before that,
and I don't even know how much that was really pushing the envelope. I mean,
well, I'm just saying it wasn't, but just saying now they had the it was timely because they were able to use bisexuality is not new, but they wouldn't have called her bisexual when in the 80s when this was made. They wouldn't have used that term.
What term would they have used back then?
They wouldn't have, they didn't call her anything. She had a complicated relationship with a woman that she clearly wasn't in. It was just her exploring herself, and then she had these relationships with these men. And I hear what you're saying about the female empowerment aspect of it. But at the end of the day, she was looking for someone that could, this is what I took from it. She was looking for somebody that could keep her attention. And then I felt it was less about empowerment and more about just the natural search for love. She was running away from it.
But... Yeah, I agree. I think the empowerment comes in. So like our last conversation kind of went off the rails, but I think at the core of it, it was about the idea that certain things can mean different things to different people. And I think the empowerment comes out of just the fact that the film exists. And to watch a film where a woman kind of like cycles between these three men and is very honest about loving all of them, right? Appreciating all of them for who they are and what they bring to the table. And then being honest about the flaw within herself is that, like she needs to be constantly stimulated. And that's why she prefers to cycle between the three of them instead of choosing one. And I think just the courage of the character to admit those things and to keep living her life like that. Because it really wasn't, it's not like it's a movie about her trying to decide who should I choose, right? Like,
well, that honestly
I think that it comes up.
But I think that was the underlying, and it's bad for a man to point that out, but ultimately that's what was happening. And the reality of it, that's what it was. That's really what it was. And it was a power dynamic of her being able to choose rather somebody choosing for her. I think that's the nuance that I got watching it at this age versus being too young to be watching it and understanding it.
Right.
But
so
I got
something different. A little bit different. I think for me, it was like, I felt like she was comfortable where she was. I felt like the pressure to choose was coming from like outside, right? Like it was like society at large, and then these men, right, who all wanted to be her number one, her one and only. But I never got the feeling that she herself was like, okay, I gotta choose one, and I gotta stop doing what I'm doing, and I gotta choose one.
But I don't think you watched that movie recently. Because
I actually watched it. The last time I watched it was right after I finished. I watched it again recently, like right after the first season of the reboot. Like after I watched
watching it for age value. Will let you see things that I didn't see when I first watched it. I think I was like 9 when I first watched this, and things went over my head, and I've watched it a couple times after that. But just, it was little things that showed you she wasn't comfortable. She was having nightmares about women beating her up, about taking their man. Like her behavior it didn't seem comfortable, in my opinion. It didn't seem like she was comfortable in it because she was having nightmares about it.
Yeah. I feel like, so there's nightmares that you have because you feel guilty, right? Like there's something going on, like an internal conflict with you. And then there's nightmares that you have because of the world around you, right? And like the things that you fear. So I guess my thing was like, okay, those nightmares were like, I think she was very aware of like she was going against the grain of like modern society, which and oftentimes, especially for women, makes you kind of like a pariah, right? Like people will look at you differently. They will speak about you differently. Some people will have the audacity to treat you to your face differently. And no, I don't think anybody has felt that more than Black women, right? So, so there's you saw her having nightmares, and some of her, I saw it as her being aware of what the expectation of her as a woman was, and the real
she was sleeping with other people's men. I don't think that's like that. The whole idea why she didn't have a roommate anymore is because she slept with her roommate's boyfriend. Like it was many. It was. And I'm not judging whether it's wrong or right. To me, that's not something that you should do.
No, I think it's dead wrong.
Yeah, but in today's world, you can't justify that because you're going against, somebody's identity.
No,
But
it is.
but it just watching it now and compare, like I was able to watch maybe 1 or 2 episodes of the new version of it, and I think that's where it went wrong because the authenticity of it, pushing the envelope, being able to go against the grain was not something it was doing. It was just living in whatever the valley is for the moment. And that's what the difference was. But the complicated nature of this is sleeping with somebody who can stimulate you physically, like financially, versus they just have sex good or they make you laugh. Like, it's nothing wrong with those things, but the complicated nature becomes when you begin to spread yourself thin. And I think this happens to men. But I think the difference between men and women is women are dating for the future tense. And I don't think there's any much difference in men, but I think men are able to compartmentalize. Look, this is fun, and I'm not going to talk to this person. I'm not going to call this person. I'm just going to reach out when I'm ready. Versus women are constantly in this test mode. Like, I'm always testing. And I just saw this movie as a prime example of how either side can get into trouble when they're not honest about their intentions. And I think ultimately, she portrayed herself to the men, even though because I thought when I watched it the last time, she had said to them, "Hey, I'm dating all these other people." And then when they ultimately found out about each other, they all teamed up. But that it was so many unrealistic things that would have happened in this. But at the same time, it's very possible if you maintain your control. But the moment you lose your control, now, and what we saw the arc of the movie, the kind of change of power in the movie, that's when it became uncomplicated. And now she was forced to make a decision. Before, she had the power, and then somehow she let that power slowly slip on her hand. But just watching this years later, I had not seen this movie since I was probably a teenager. It was very different for me, and I didn't
because
see
you ain't
love
really seen
at
it.
all.
Because you ain't really seen
it.
Because
It was more
like,
so,
and that's what I was talking about earlier when we were in the earlier conversation. You're like, there's so many films that I remember seeing. I remember the names, right? Like, I remember little things about them, and then I watch them, and it's so like saying you saw something at 10 or 11,
right?
man. Like
I just remember this was just such a
it's very
sexual
different.
movie. It
It's
was
very
just so
different.
sexual, and it like this was one of the movies where, of course, your mother will walk in at an awkward moment of the movie or something
Right.
like that. And so it was. I've remembered it being very provocative and very like, I'm had to turn this down because it might get somebody might hear me listening to it. Like, I would watch a lot of Spike Lee. This one and Girl 6. I would watch these movies all the time because they were just very interesting to me creatively, and just, I always had this feeling of being free from what people or communities think you should be. And those movies definitely were just outside of what was normal at the
So
time.
what do you think about the love aspect? Because she often claimed to be in love with all three of them.
Well, she was looking for. I think she was looking for one of them to combat her or to question her. And up until that point, all of them went along with it. Even once they all found out about each other, they all just
Well,
competed
she
for
was
her
very
attention.
dismissive. Like,
because none of them ever questioned
it was
her.
like the fear. Well, I would say that there were times in the movies where all of them I feel like were getting to that point, and then the prospect was that oh, like you're boring me now, or like
that was the second one. That was the second guy. He got bored with her because he was the rich, cultured one.
No, I'm talking about her attitude towards them when they would start to question certain things about her.
But that's because she had the power. She still had the power. So they could attempt to question her, but she would shoot it down. And then the fear of losing what their connection to her was, whether it was sex or just hanging with her, it got out of hand. But ultimately, the one guy at the end was like, you know what? You're not gonna play with me like this. And when he made that choice and was about to leave her, that's when she knew that's the one for me. So the movie ends with him forcing her to come to him.
Yeah.
And that's how I looked at it as an adult now, somebody who has been through complicated relationships, and it's just that power dynamic, and how in the beginnings of relationship we try to anchor that power for ourselves. Like, you can't control me, so I control who calls who and what we do and how, like that was kind of the overall theme of this whole episode, just understanding that power dynamic and how once you lose it, that's it. That's it. Whatever you had is gone now.
Gone.
But that was an interesting film. It's something that
always an interesting film. I feel like you always want. I feel like sending a younger person to watch this film, they're gonna be so like just confused and out of touch because things have changed so much.
Right. That's how the TV show came to be,
and that's how the TV show came out. And that was the disconnect for me with the TV show, was that we live in a time now where like what was so revolutionary and kind of like new to film and the original is just it's just a regular Thursday night special now. So
but you can tell their interpretation was from a youthful perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Which it needs
to
be.
We gotta call her bisexual because that just gives her the power. Like, and you could tell the guys in the first films were archetypes of guys, but they went even further with that theme and and it bored me, because if you're able to give women that level of complexity, why can't these guys have that same level of complexity? Like, they wouldn't have made one of the guys bisexual because that would have just been that's just too freaky for him. But it just I just couldn't get into it. I couldn't allow myself.
Well, it's funny because I don't feel like they changed a whole lot.
They just try to update everything, but
I think with the updating it, they did like the whole bisexual subplot, and I'm trying to remember. I don't think that existed in the original. Although I do feel like she alluded to the fact that she had been with women before in the original.
Well, she had a girlfriend. It was remember the girlfriend. She was kind of like, that was the first one she started pushing
in the original, right?
Yeah, she had,
right. So they really didn't change much.
They didn't. It was just now everything has a label to it. So before, because there wasn't a label put on things, there were labels then, but they wouldn't have called it that for the sake of the movie. But now labeling something almost boxes it in even more. Whereas though then, okay, you saw the girl, but the girl was the one that she liked the least. So why put her in a box now to call her bisexual? So she has to go and date women, or she has to be with women while she's with, because they almost made it seem like it was always a choice for her. Like, it always was like either or, and we know from the original there was no either or. She just was whatever she was. You didn't have to call her something, but that's what's happening now. Everything has to be stamped with a label so the outside world can understand it.
Well, that was my whole point around the word toxic.
And that's why I said I agree with you.
I feel like it's more of a label than something that actually gives me context to what's going on with you.
But now, but see the context now. But see, in the past, when you use terms like that, you knew exactly what somebody meant. It normally meant somebody who was physically abusive, mentally abusive. But now there are layers to it. Because now we've opened up.
That's layers. I think layers is always helpful. I think layers is good, right? Because layers is just really just add. It's more perspective, right? It means when you've added layers, it means that you've gone above the surface.
But now those layers only come out. But now those layers aren't just on the surface anymore. You have to actually dig deeper into a conversation, because now me calling something toxic normally refers to me being toxic and me being stuck in a situation that now I can see and now I have awareness of. But it normally in present day means it's something wrong with me, because I've been okay with this for a long time and now I'm just saying I don't like it.
So see that's you. That's I feel like that goes back to the trust.
And that's why I brought it all up.
Trust. Because if you came to me and you said, I had to get out of this because he was toxic or she was toxic, and my thought process was like, nah, nigga, you toxic.
Right. Exactly.
That's the trust part. And but see, that's why I was saying what I was saying. That I don't really care for toxic as the word to describe stuff, because
the door has to open somewhere.
So in the situations where what you describe, where toxicity in itself, the word becomes a doorway or just an easier way for people to generally say, I'm not happy, or I don't feel as though I'm being treated right. I totally agree with.
Right.
What I'm seeing now is people using it in the place of the layers that you were just talking about. Right.
Well, that comes with experience, though. That comes with people being able to have experience. So now people.
Well, these are people. Well, let me clarify. These are people that I know have the ability and the experience to actually lay out and communicate effectively what's going on in their relationship, and they're falling back on the word toxic.
Yeah, but that totally erases what you just said, though, because they then don't have the ability to effectively do it. Because if they're falling back on something, that means mentally or maturity wise, they not there yet. They may educationally can write out something, but to naturally go to a place, it's just not there. But I like, see, this is where I was going with the theme, but I just knew it could be anything. So this next film is definitely a
toxic.
It's toxic, but it's a staple in our
toxic relationship in Black culture.
Right, just like Toni Braxton is the breakup song queen, this movie is the go-to movie for domestic violence.
Yes.
Like I can see the relationship.
I mean, her story is
Just the term.
This is an autobiography. I can Tina eat the cake, anime.
Right, like it begot. I think it normalized
become a part of the popular culture.
Right, and this is another word. It normalized domestic violence.
Do you think it normalized it?
In terms of pop culture, it was always normalized in our personal family structures, domestic violence. I don't think that's why this movie exists, because men didn't know how to keep their hands to themselves and historically it happened that way. But this normalized it in like the pop culture realm of don't make me slap the shit out you. Okay, Ike, don't hit me, Ike. Don't like it. It almost kind of took away the sting of domestic violence until very recently, when now the Me Too movement has come and no, you can't put your hands on me. So we're dealing with it now, and now we're able to combat it. But when this movie came out, it was almost a joke, their relationship. And many people, like, there are bloggers now that are actually a few right now that are actually covering this movie and comparing it to the autobiography. Now, what people don't realize is Tina Turner was executive producer over one of the executive producers over this film, so she was there for the making of this film. Very few. Well, now it's new. Is normal now to make your own biopic, but up until one point, it wasn't really a norm for people to be included in their own biopics. It was always some unauthorized biography or a book that was written about the person, because you don't need permission from the person to write about them. You just can't include their legal content like music and stuff like that in it. But she was there for the making of this. So it was very controversial because, like most biopics, they have to make it sensationalized. So there are many elements from the actual book or the true story that are blown up or kind of shrunk down. And she got a lot of flack because of how Ike was portrayed in this movie. Many people did not believe that she was battered because she stayed with Ike for decades. She was with Ike for over almost 30 years.
Battered women do that. That's a poor. I think that's a poor. I think.
Right.
Excuse me. I think that's a poor.
Explanation.
Yeah. And that's not to say that things may not have been exaggerated and. Right. And obviously when you're creating a film, the sensationalism, especially when you're making a film about real life, because a lot of times real life ain't as interesting as people.
But the argument about her relationship was because she was this big star, and why would she leave him? But because one, she didn't start out as a big star. She was a child. She was a teenager.
I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like we could list a laundry reasons. Like first and foremost, women. Like we know that it is very, very difficult for women who are in abusive relationships to walk away from abusive relationships, right? Like we know that, and that in my opinion should be enough, right? Like no one should be like, well, she stayed. Like we know now, like there's a science behind it. There is the sheer numbers of it, right? Like we know that women will stay in abusive relationships. When you couple that with money and power and influence and fame, I think that just exasperates whatever that issue is.
Right.
That keeps women in.
It doesn't necessarily make it easier.
Like I don't think adding fame and money and business arrangements and things like that to that mix make it any better. So I've always felt like it's easier for a regular broke woman to leave a regular broke man who's abusive than it is for a woman who is successful and powerful and has an image all of those things come into play.
But we know none of those things are correct because it depends on the person. But this movie has become the staple for complicated love stories. And it is.
Well, let's call it what it is. I think it's the staple for abusive love stories.
Abusive. I mean,
because you can be complicated without it being abusive, right? Like Queen and Slim was complicated. Moonlight. All of the movies that we've been talking about have been complicated relationships. Right. This is the first one where we're talking about a relationship that also included physical abuse. So let's just call it what it is.
It told. I mean, if you read the book, you understand there were a lot. It was a lot more to it. Not outside of the domestic violence, but to their relationship, it was a lot more to it than just them being business partners. You know, the movie alludes to this was Ike's behavior prior to meeting Tina. This is how he treated both men and women in his life. So it wasn't unique to his relationship with Tina, but this became when the thing first popped in my head. This was the first movie that I thought about because we jokingly joke about this so much. Like anybody that's about to hit you, we call them Ike. Or, you know, the whole eat the cake. And I've heard that so many times jokingly from people.
Right.
And it, you know, in watching interviews, this was why she said she couldn't go to the movie theater or the premiere to watch this movie. She said I couldn't do it. She said because she was very afraid that people were going to laugh at moments that were uncomfortable or real or her lived experiences. And it was really, and shout out to once again to Angela Bassett for pulling off a remarkable experience, a biopic experience for us, and really giving it because she was lip singing, which is horribly hard, and dancing and choreography and acting on top of all that in such a physical role that she had to be. This is one of probably her most physical roles that I've ever seen her in, and this is when she became iconic for her guns, her physique. I think this is the first time people really saw her in that way. But I love the movie, but I'm always uncomfortable saying I love the movie because it's again an experience that many women in my family had, and it was hard. It's hard still watching certain scenes when you see him backhand her or slap her or beat her. It's very hard, but it forced me to read the book when it first came out as well, and seeing it, and it's like it almost mirrors The Color Purple, almost like, and it was one of the reasons. It was so much so a part of Tina's life that Tina was supposed to be Celie, and she turned down the role. So that people knew about her abuse for so long that they wanted her to play Celie in The Color Purple. And her remarks was she had lived that life already. She didn't want to play it again in a movie.
Oh boy.
So interesting movie. We have two more. The next one is Why Did I Get Married? Now I included this one because we hate on Tyler Perry so much in such a loving way. But I wanted to include.
We hate on him in a loving way.
Yeah, I mean, because I think we all love Tyler Perry. We all watch those.
Oh yeah, plays. I agree.
We all watch those play movies that he did in the beginning. But when he didn't evolve, he just got richer. I think, especially a lot of us who are in the industry, I think we begin to look at him with a much critical eye. But we were probably the first ones that probably got him rich because it was a whole theatrical experience that many of us loved. But then when he didn't evolve, and it just felt like it got worse, and he got richer from the worst. That's when. But this movie,
I have a very unique. I have my own kind of outlook on the whole Tyler Perry situation, but that's a conversation for another day. But I do agree with what you said. I think everybody loves Tyler Perry.
We love to hate him.
I think everybody black loves Tyler Perry.
Yeah.
And some of the criticisms are fair.
Fair? You're being very nice.
Well, some of them I think are unfair. I think if I look at all of the criticisms and their total, I think that fair is the is the term that I come to, because I think that a lot of them are unfair criticisms. Like, I don't agree with all of the criticisms of Tyler Perry's films. I think some of them are very appropriate and very fair. And then some of them I think are just nitpicking and you wanting this director, this person to be what you want them to be versus appreciating and taking in who they are. Like, even you use the word evolve, right? And while I understand and appreciate what it means to evolve in inside of your art form, I also understand and appreciate what it means to find your niche and to stick with your niche. And while I understand it for some audience members and some viewers, that someone who finds their niche can eventually wear out their welcome, right? Yeah. Because you're not offering me a whole lot new. But then I also understand that it's a niche for a reason, because there's always that pocket audience for.
And ultimately, it's always gonna be stuff that people like and they don't like. But for me, what it took away from, and I don't want to use the word legitimate, but what it took away from Black theater, not people doing Black theater, but Black theater, it took many bodies out of the seats in Black theater without it evolving. If he had evolved theatrically, I can't speak for the film side, but theatrically, if he had evolved beyond the spectacle, the sets and costumes and the celebrity faces, right? If he would have evolved, into actual musical formats, I would have stayed a fan. I'm gonna say it that way. But I didn't see that evolving, and then I started seeing the seats being taken from Black theater that was working hard to evolve and actually tell our story from a non-spectacle space. And that was my only argument with it. But I have the same argument for urban novels. You spit out these books every 2 or 3 months, but you really haven't taken your audience that you've developed on any type of evolutional ride. They haven't evolved in it. You're writing the same salacious story and just putting different characters in it. That's the same argument I have with urban novels as I have with
and you're talking about his theatrical performance. Because
the films have definitely evolved. That's why I chose Why Did I Get Married? It was definitely because this was, I believe, one of his first attempts to cast in a non-spectacle way. Of course, many of these people were named. You had Janet Jackson, Tasha.
No, but I understand what you mean.
Scott,
I understand what you mean. They were casted for purpose, as opposed to
for spectacle.
I get it. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
It wasn't just a bunch of pretty faces.
Right.
These were people who could do the role that he was asking them to do. People don't believe it, but Janet Jackson is evolving acting wise. And I liked her in this because it gave her more structure, and it wasn't just this penny playing a role. It really Jill Scott definitely. People don't know, but Jill Scott was a off Broadway and a Broadway actress before we knew her as Jill Scott. And she is definitely a voice in the acting world. Janet, of course. And then this one had Malik Yoba.
Tasha Smith is a jewel that a lot of Black people don't even really know nothing about.
And I would say if you can afford to, or if you're in her vicinity, she's one of those people. Right, take her class. I think she's a much better teacher than she is and director than she is an actress. And she maintains those character roles that she plays, but she's definitely great. And this film, in terms of love and the complication of it, each one of the couples had a given circumstance in their relationship, whether it be I think what's it, Ja White and Tasha Smith had the whole cheating relationship versus the overbearing wife. Janet and Malik had the whole they had a baby
was a
that
public,
died.
there was they had a public image type of
Public,
thing, but they
right? Public
also were
image,
dealing with
like the death of that
with
child.
the loss of a child.
Yeah.
And most times, and actually statistically, those marriages don't last.
Right. And I can't remember the name
they had been kind of holding on because I think the child that they had lost some years before the beginning of the movie.
Before the movie starts, they had lost it.
And but not just like, it wasn't something that just happened, right? It was something that had happened a while ago, and they had kind of like they kind of been in a place where everything was about appearances, and that was the big thing in their relationship, was that it just didn't feel, there wasn't a lot of authenticity to it. It was a lot of faking for friends and family and coworkers and all that stuff.
And then it was the Jill Scott relationship, and it's always with this guy who I always think is Malik Yoba, but they were actually in the movie together. I think his name is it's Richard Jones.
Richard Jones, yeah.
I always confuse him and Malik Yoba, and then I was pissed off that they were in the movie together because I was like, this gonna fucking confuse me, because I had to watch it again so I could separate the two. But him and Jill Scott's character, Jill Scott is the overweight woman.
He's just an asshole, right?
He just badly,
exactly.
And then
because she's overweight,
right? And it was really like the different dynamics of the relationships and them all being a friend unit made me love the movie. I love both part 1 and part 2. And it really a shout out to I can't remember the other guy's name either, that comes in and dates her, but he's a pretty good actor as well from DC. But but I just like the dynamics of the stories, the different level. That's why I said this was Tyler Perry showing off. It was like his set was good. He had I didn't like how tight the camera shots were. You can tell they were in an actual home versus like a set. But it was I just like the complexity of the stories, the complexity of the characters. There weren't any flat characters. There weren't any flat, like there were some generic stories, like Jill Scott, of course, loses weight at the end, or I don't think she lost weight. I think she just put a girdle on. But but it was cool. I accepted the reality that they put out there, but I just like the complexity, the levels. The relationship seemed honest.
Yeah.
It seemed real honest to something that you could find yourself in one of those relationships.
I mean, I appreciated it, and just when you talking about, like, just in keeping with the topic of complicated love stories or complicated love, I appreciated it because, especially in our age bracket, marriage is like the thing, right? Like that's I feel like that's the pedestal that everybody aspires to. And this was a movie that really talked about how difficult that step is. Like,
but it showed black marriage, not just black love. It showed black marriage. All these couples were married.
But all of these couples are married, right? Yeah. And they've been married for some time. Absolutely. So
it showed the reality. I like the reality.
And I appreciated it. Especially from the perspective of that, it was clear that, well, with the exception of the Jill Scott Richard Jones relationship, it was very clear that all of them loved each other very much. And whatever, but they still had issues, right? Like,
I think even that one was love. It was the type of love once someone
I ain't think your love.
It was love. I think it was a form of love that
from
maybe
him?
we've never. I think it was because just like in the last film that we go talk about, I think it was once you get comfortable and you know that person not gonna leave you, you get comfortable in that relationship. So he wouldn't have been with her if he didn't love her. It was just more so he was an asshole.
Well, yeah, like at some point, right? Like, yeah, okay.
But that,
I guess you could. Yeah, like I get what you're saying on that point. But like what we saw in the film, like that
it was the
that wasn't
extreme
love
of what we would
at all. Yeah. But I will say this: I really enjoyed that part of the sequel,
right?
Because once he got him, once he had to endure something that was potentially life threatening. Like the only person that he could even think to turn to, right, was his ex-wife.
Right.
And we,
now that's when it becomes. That's to me, and that theme has played in a lot of his pieces. That's the part that's unrealistic because I don't know personally a black woman who would go back and take care of her. I don't.
I'm trying to think.
I don't. That's the reality for me. But it's cute to see it on film, though. It's cute.
I might have to agree with you on that one. I don't know if I know. No, I take that back. I think I know a couple. I think I do. I think I know a couple black women who I don't know if they would have ever admitted it. They probably would have did that shit in secret.
If it was some insurance money on the line, then yeah. But I'm just saying, I know people who have stayed married. And they've been separated for years and don't even know about each other's life. But I'm gonna come back for that funeral. But you sick? Oh, okay. Tell me how that works out for you.
Yeah, but I think I know a couple black women that probably would have done what she did.
Oh, okay. Well,
and I don't even know if she was really. I don't know if she was actually like. What was she doing? She was just she was taking him to his chemo appointments. I think it was.
Honestly, I never got into part 2.
Yeah, if I remember it correctly, she was just accompanying him to his chemo appointments and helping him. She
became his caregiver. Yeah.
No, she wasn't, and that was the thing. Like when her husband busted in on them, it looked like that, but what it really was that she was just accompanying him. So when she was helping him get situated, like they had just come back from. She was not caregiving for him or like taking care.
I don't remember part 2 as much as because I've really was a fan of part 1, and I only watched part 2.
Would you have called Tasha Smith's and Michael J. White's relationship? Was that a toxic relationship?
It very much so, and that was the one that So the Janet and Malik Yoba one, I know that. I know many family members and friends that are in that relationship. And then the Tasha and Jai relationship, that's the one I know offhand. I could name 5 family members that are Tasha and 5 friends and family members that's Jai White. I know their relationship. Always, the woman being a domineering one, and the control in the relationship, and him messing up, and him supplying her and bringing her up, upgrading her, and then the flip, the situation changed, and now, So, and I think their relationship was so iconic that understandable that they actually got one of the TV shows, Why Did I Get Married or something like that, became their spinoff to that movie. That's why there never was, I think, a part 3 to the movie, because they actually got a spinoff TV show based on their relationship. Because it was the most that we all know that relationship. I literally right now I know an ex-football player who lives in the city, who is going through that as we speak, like literally as we speak. You know, shout out if you ever listen to this. Sorry about that, but I ain't say your name. But I just that relationship is just because insert ex drug dealer, ex athlete, ex breadwinner, and now the tables turned and she that came up and now, but that's a toxic relationship. Even the Jill Scott that was toxic. That's toxic to me. Because that's just something that is borderline abusive. Tasha is more verbally abusive, where Jill Scott's husband was more mentally abusive. But I was hoping that it wasn't going to be like a stereotypical where each relationship has a certain thing where, I didn't want to see a physically abusive relationship, but that's the only thing that wasn't missing. But they were verbally abusive, though. I think Tasha and the other guy was very mentally abusive in their relationship. But I think those two relationships are the ones we remember the most. Even the one that was the least believable to me, but it still was the Tyler Perry and the other young lady. And we didn't even talk about this, but that was the least realistic.
I think that was the least believable relationship for everybody. As I got older, I kind of was disappointed because I realized that for most people, it was a superficial. It was like, oh, she would never be with somebody like Tyler Perry. You know what I mean? And it was all based on the looks.
It was looks,
and that wasn't for everybody. I'm saying I think that's where I was coming from. And then as I got older, I realized that I was in good company, right? Like we were all just like, man, Tyler Perry can't bag nothing that, you know what I mean? Like,
but I mean, look around and you start seeing that's possible.
But then as you get older and you start to look at it from a different lens, you just see how toxic she was and how unappreciative she really was, right? Like she had a man who was like all about her, like completely like dedicated and committed to her. And I think look at it in the whole from the perspective of the sequel, like even may have even known that he may not have been the apple of her eye the way that she was the apple of his, right?
Well, that's the survival. That's the relationship we don't talk about a lot. That's a survival relationship. I'm gonna get with somebody that can take care of me. I don't love them. I don't want to be with them. I'm gonna have my piece on the side. And we saw in their relationship that women, we know this happens, but women have these relationships as well. It's not just men that are in these survival relationships.
I didn't know men were in survival relationships. I thought men just went on ahead and got the divorce or
no.
I didn't realize that so many men
that's the whole
survival relationship.
That's what's called a hobosexual. That's the term homosexual. That's where that comes from.
I guess.
So women can be homosexuals, and
hold on. Well,
learning men can be.
Okay, so in this situation, I was more thinking the relationship where like a woman like gets with a guy who's like financially secure and successful, so that she can be taken care of. So I don't know if I can equate that to a homosexual, huh?
And you didn't know that a homosexual is somebody who don't have a place of their own.
Yeah, no, I know what a homosexual is. But
it just it does sound different when you talk about a man versus a woman. It just feels more natural for a woman to get into a relationship. But you know what?
Like a homosexual, I think and see, this is what I'm talking about with the language and the definitions. Like, I feel like a homosexual is a very.
I know I've been using that for a while. I've been using that.
But what I'm saying is that when you say homosexual, like, I understand that we're talking about a guy who is broke and don't have no place to stay, and he's in relationships with certain people because of what they can provide. Right, like,
you don't think women do that?
Okay, I'm not saying that women don't. I'm not. So to answer your question, yes, I know women do that. In the context of this movie we're talking about, though, I think it's harder to pinpoint it with women because it's typically something that all women seek out, regardless of their current situation.
Right.
right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, are there broke women who aren't really doing anything with their lives looking for men to take care of them? Yes. But then
But
one
we
of the
normally
biggest
call them gold diggers.
well, not even just them, because
Mm-hmm.
the flip side to that is there are very, very successful women, very well to do, like women of means who have built themselves up on their own, who still are looking for a man who, can take care of them.
I
They,
would
they
just say
can
it just
provide for
doesn't
them.
look the same because it ultimately
It doesn't look the
it
same at
comes
all,
the same.
but it is, and I think that's. But what I'm saying, I guess, to my point is that I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why it's harder to kind of view it the same way, because it doesn't necessarily change for women. Like, women are typically always looking for a man who
Somebody
is
to take
going
care of them.
to provide. I'm gonna get away from take care and just say provide, right? Like,
But
because
it's a difference because that the connotation about providing is okay. I have my own, but I want a man to be able to come in and handle those things. But in the
right,
case of a homosexual, I am literally, and I think it just looks different on women because women make it look different than what men normally.
I don't
When you
think
talk
women make
about
it look different. I think that we just understand that the idea of me not having X, Y, and Z, and for women, I think that historically, like, that's been the expectation, is that I don't have X, Y, and Z, and I need to go find a man who has X, Y, and Z, and then we're gonna get together, and now we got X, Y, and Z. And that's just something that women, no matter what their status was, like, poor women were looking for that, and rich women were looking for that, right? Like, if you were born into a rich family, then you were just looking for another, like, you know what I mean? Like, you were looking for another man from a rich family, or a family that was at least as wealthy as yours, right? And then he would provide the X, Y, and Z. Um, it just doesn't change much, but you don't find men of means going to look for women to shack up with. You know what I mean? Like, if I got a good job and I got my own place and all this stuff, I'm not looking for a relationship so I can go live with another woman to have a place to stay. Um, so I think that there's that part that makes it a little different. Like, it's easier to distinguish with men. You still there? All right. Looks like we may have lost our co-host for a moment. So, so why did I get married? Definitely check it out, Tyler Perry. Um, and I guess it looks like we moving on to Malcolm and Marie. Did we lose you there for a second, Nate? So Malcolm and Marie just debuted on Netflix Friday night, and it's a film. It's a very different kind of film. If so, first things first is that it all takes place over the course of a night between two characters. They're the only two characters in the film. It is beautifully shot in black and white. Even if you're not a fan of black and white cinematography, like the older black and white films, I think that many will find an appreciation for Malcolm and Marie, just because of the very unique way that it was shot. It was shot in a very claustrophobic way. A lot of it takes place inside of this house, and it's framed in a very tight knit type of atmosphere. The performances are stellar. Both John David Washington and Zendaya, I mean, they go for broke in this movie. They have great chemistry between the two of them. The performances are to die for. I definitely expect well, I always had this thing, like I would expect normally that this movie would definitely be an awards contender, but because this is like it literally came out at the beginning of what will be the next award season, so like it wouldn't qualify for like the Academy Awards or the SAG Awards or anything like that this year. So we'd be looking at the 2022 award season. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to come out between now and then.
Well, it's not going to be a lot of things that are going to be filled up in this award season anyway, because a lot of stuff didn't come out as planned. But
that's true. But I think most of the stuff that didn't come out, honestly, with like the big tentpole films,
right?
With normally outside of like visual effects and sound effects, like they're not award contending movies anyway. I think most of the films that did come out were the type of films that, you know, I mean, usually like these award films, it was Malcolm and Marie going to do huge numbers in the theaters? Probably not. I mean,
it probably would have.
It could have done some decent numbers, but I mean, a blockbuster type movie, probably not. I don't know. Like Zendaya is a big draw. John David Washington is definitely building up a fan base, so it probably actually could have done.
It would have did very well with like younger 20s, or 30 something.
It's been a good date night film for the millennial crowd. So
it was. I do agree with you. It was shot well, and I like the black and light.
It was shot. Somebody pointed out something. I was in a conversation. Did you notice that in the lighter moments in the film that the transition went from a black and white to almost like a grayish hue type of thing?
Yeah, it was.
So I didn't notice that slightly. I didn't notice that. So when I go back and watch it again, because I am at some point going to go back and watch it again, I'm a check for that. But apparently, in those moments where they weren't angry or fighting, like arguing with each other,
it got lighter.
It got the cinematography actually got lighter. So I'm gonna go back and actually check for that.
I know, you know, and maybe I'd seen it, and we added this one early because it just came out. So
it came out on Friday. It came out Friday night.
It to watch. I'm just saying to watch. And I guess I'm telling my age range now, my group. This was very much so like a triggering, and there's another word, film, because it would allude that it's going in a certain direction and then it will go back. And I'm not going to use the T word. But
because everybody else is, and I figured that our toxic conversation was going to come to a head.
Right.
I almost like when we started it in Queen and Slim, I almost said to you, like, you know what? Let's just keep it moving because we clearly gonna have a toxic conversation or a conversation about.
But this one, you could clearly, but because of the conversation they're having, the dialogue that they're having, you see the levels of toxic behavior in their relationship.
You do,
and you could, and that was my reasoning for saying you have to have a conversation with a lot of these people to understand why something is toxic now. Because now things need an explanation because there's so many different layers and variations of what that word is to many different people. But this movie right here, it was triggering because as a black man in this world we're living in now, it feels like nothing we do will ever be heard. And it all, no matter what the scenario, it feels like a woman can always bring it back to how she's been hurt. And that's like towards the end of the movie, she was asking for an apology for a number of things.
All she wanted was a thank you.
All she wanted was a thank you.
And the whole there was the whole the back half of the movie. I kept saying to my girlfriend, I was like, "Yo, if this nigga don't say thank you, if this nigga don't just say
but
thank you."
I think I think that was it was filmed to be the hardest thing for him to say, and it spoke to the generation that we're in. Everybody is selfish. You know, if something becomes successful, people look for every reason why I should not say thank you to these people, or how success. It just felt real millennial. This was such a millennial movie to me.
You think so?
It was in so many different ways.
I always thought I felt like it took the entirety of that argument for him to fully understand why the thank you was so important to her.
And I think
that's why he has. I think that's what took him so long to say it.
And I get it, and that I understand. If it was just simply that, this wouldn't have been a movie. It wouldn't have been. It would.
It was everything in between that made the movie.
Right.
So, I started the movie talking. I watched it with my girlfriend, and for the first third of the movie, I was just sitting there like, "Wow, this nigga is the most toxic nigga in existence." I was like, "Yo, he is so abusive and he's so toxic." And about halfway through the movie, I realized that while I did not, I definitely found some of his flaws problematic. I realized that this was deeper. I realized it was deeper than him just being toxic in a general sense. I realized that the toxicity was very mutual, and that there was much more going on with both of them, and it made it a much more, I don't want to say enjoyable film, because listen, I think that this film was great. Like, I think it deserves all of the awards. I think that it was great simply because when I got done, I was emotionally, I was exhausted. I was mentally and emotionally drained. We watched after we finished watching that movie, we intentionally turned on the comedy special on Netflix. They Have Arrived, or They Are Ready.
The second season of
Tiffany Haddish joint, because because of the effect of Malcolm and Marie. Like, it was such a heavy movie. But I feel like that was why it was so great, because if you walked away from this movie like, oh, the movie's over, let's go, I would be very surprised. Like, if you didn't have some type of visceral reaction to what was happening. That spoke to the brilliance of the actors, and just the tension. Yeah,
I wish, and maybe it was just me. I wish the actors were older having this conversation, but it would have been a different outcome, probably, or journey. I think the journey would have been different. They may have had similar outcomes, but the journey would have been different. I just would have enjoyed it more if it was older actors playing it, maybe like in their 30s and 40s.
And see, I feel like we've seen that movie though.
Yeah, but not just the level of honesty. It's just the level of honesty in the dialogue. We don't normally get to that point in this way with older cast. Normally, if it was an older cast, right, it would have been a lot of screaming and yelling, and somebody would have stormed out, and a baby would have been revealed at some point. Like, it would have been.
I actually appreciated that about Malcolm and Marie, that there was no point where either. Like, I think that that's become something that we recognize as very problematic and or toxic in relationships that no one really wants to address. Is like, when the tough conversation, when the tough shit get going, you can't just be like, I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm walking out. Right.
That's why I said I wanted to see an older couple having this Not like 50s, 60s, but like
Nah.
30s and 40s. I wish I would have
I
seen
mean, they
that.
both like what, late 30s?
They were playing
I'm
in
sorry,
their
early
20s
30s.
though.
They like late
Yes.
20s, early 30s.
But I didn't believe it. I didn't believe
Really?
they were playing because neither one of them are 30 anything yet. They are both in their 20s. So it read they were playing as if they were in their early 30s. But it didn't seem like the people I was watching had the level of growth that these two were playing. Like I think they were playing like they were 30. And they made both of them maybe about to touch 30, but I could just tell.
Yeah, I didn't really compare it to their like a physical age.
Yeah.
I did appreciate that they were both like I did appreciate the way it was handled. And I it never dawned on me that like, wait a minute, they too young to handle this maturely. Because I felt like there were parts of it that were very immature. I feel like they were.
But that's in relationship in general.
But that's why I liked about it, because that's in relationships in general.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I recognized was that with both of the characters, to me it felt like a lot of appreciation for one another with a lack of self-reflection. And I felt like we were witnessing an argument between two mature people who were very they weren't very aware of themselves, right? There was like a lot going on where I felt like, if they had better communication, this probably would have never have happened. There were parts of the story I really appreciate, but I really did appreciate, because I just knew that this was going to end with them breaking up. There was one point where I was afraid that she might have harmed herself or him, like that it could have turned into something physical.
Seeing that unpredictable,
it was very unpredictable,
right? That's why I desired.
But you know why I appreciated it? Because I think that a lot of people that I've heard talking about this film they're talking about it in their relation, as like Malcolm and Marie's relationship as a whole. And I realized that the way that this film plays out and the way that it's shot, it's literally shot in a way for the audience to be a fly on the wall in this one specific moment in their relationship. This moment does not characterize their whole relationship.
Well, I mean, they've told the story, so you pretty much can see the pattern of their relationship. So you see
that there's some patterns and whatnot. But I still think that it was shown in a way that it was expected that the audience would take this as the movie,
have a conversation,
just like this conversation. I really appreciated the ebbs and flows of the conversation, because that's something that I think is really, really needed in relationships, is this idea that we do not have to scream our way to a conclusion.
Right.
We can have this part of the conversation, take a break, come back to it, take a break, come back to it, go outside, let off some steam, come back to it, right? Like, I appreciated the ebbs and flows.
That's one of the reasons why I pulled back from it. One of the reasons I pulled back from it a little bit is because I just didn't believe it age-wise.
Okay.
And somebody their age would have left. One of them would have left. He would have put her out, or she would have left, or there would have been some horrible reveal. Like, it just wasn't believable in their age range. The way it was shot, the dialogue, the script itself, it was good. I just have an image with this Hollywood cookie cutter casting. I just don't, and I think Zendaya has been I think she's transitioning, just like Jussie Smollett's sister. I think she did a great transition from being a child performer to an adult. But I would have saw her in this better than Zendaya. I'm sorry. I know she's been in everything in the last couple years, but I would have saw Smollett in this better than.
Well, that was a huge big issue, was their age difference, right?
Yeah.
Because he is mid-30s. She's
Okay, yeah.
24.
And
So
she just wasn't pulling it off for me. She just wasn't.
mm,
I didn't believe all the stuff that uh it, it I didn't believe her emotion. I could see her pushing, I could see the work that she put into it. But being, a sexy little 20-some-year-old does not equate to lived experience to me. And because you pretty and you're cute, it doesn't make you like solid. Like Smollett, I would have seen her.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen her in that.
Because it would have been more tension,
that would have been. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I just didn't. I mean, I did like the way it looked. It was very. This would have been something I would have seen Spike Lee directing or something. I would have seen him doing something like this. I'm surprised, this wasn't something he had already done. But I just didn't. But him, the guy, his intensity, his consistency, the perceived narcissism that he had, like I saw that coming from him. I just saw her relying on cuteness, and it was like she was playing grown, and you could tell her reactions. This wasn't what a woman who had been drug addicted and in this dependency relationship and it just didn't.
So you just didn't buy her.
I didn't. I really didn't. So
I didn't have no issues with her performance, to be honest. I thought that her character was written very differently. Like clearly she was a very different character from him. And I think that there was, you got to be true to that character.
Yeah.
Where if oh, what is her name? I don't want to call her Jussie Smollett's sister.
I just call her Smollett. I cannot. I can't remember her first name.
But with her casted in a role, I think that you would have had more matching of energy in some of those scenes, which honestly, I'm not sure would have been a good thing.
But it would have been. They could never match each other because that would have just been.
Right, it would have just been screaming and
screaming
and
but
screaming
I
on
think
top of screaming.
It would have been the highs and lows as it went on. I think we would have gotten more depth. From the female character than from what we got. And I'm not. I just feel like youthful wise. She doesn't have. I mean, if you've been broken up with or had a couple tough relationships, it doesn't qualify you to have depth in a specific area, especially if you're not good at conveying that. That was my whole that was my whole argument against this. I didn't find any other things at fault. I love a play that could be in one day or one moment.
I love that movie because I felt like it would have made a great play.
Yeah,
that's
I like that.
I realized about it. Just like even the opening scene. I think he must have circled that couch, or he must have circled the living room like 6 or 7 times.
Yeah,
and I was like, damn, that would make for a great opening in a play. You know what I mean? So it drew me in. In the first 10, 15 minutes, just based
off it had that feeling to it.
Feeling alone.
It was just her. That was the only
I didn't have a problem with her. But although I see what you're saying about having someone who physically looked.
But that's the Hollywood way of doing things.
But you know, but I don't even know. You know what? You're probably right. But in this particular situation, like it was like, you know, it was a relationship thing. You know what I mean? Like the guy who wrote and directed this movie is the same guy who wrote and directed the show that has been very popular, Euphoria. So, you know, and I mean, I'm sure, you know, like as even in theater, like when you find your synergy working with a particular director, a particular actor, like that's who you turn to, right? Like, you know, like that's who you want to work with. And I think that it was one of those situations more than anything. It was
Journey,
just like,
that's her name.
Journey Smollett,
Smollett,
But like this is, you know, this is my actor. This who I, you know, it's like Spike and Denzel. You know what I mean? Like there were plenty of black actors that Spike could have worked with. You know what I mean? Like, but how many times did he like call Denzel like, "Hey man, I need you to come and do this." You know what I mean? It's like when you find a good working relationship with someone. So I think honestly that it was more of that than like, I don't think he ever really had anybody else. I don't think he really had anybody else as an idea for the role of Marie.
I mean,
like,
for some
wrote
reason,
the movie around her, because if you've ever watched Euphoria, you realize that Marie is Rue, you know, a couple years later, like a couple years down the line, like literally the life that she was living is the life that she's playing in Euphoria, the movie, the show on HBO.
And maybe stuff like that is why I don't get it. I'm not here for it. I don't get it because she not. If they had made this movie a couple years from now, and the character was able to age up into what this character is now, it would be more believable. But that's why I don't like typecasting. That's why, you know.
Well, in this situation, I don't think it was typecasting. I think it was just a relationship type of thing. Like, you know, like he's the director. He was the writer and director of this film. And he already had, you know, his actress that he's worked with before, who he has good synergy with. And he's like, I want her on this film, for better or for worse. Now that you bring it up, I see, like, I definitely see, like, the difference, like, as far as the
and I'll watch that show, but maybe if I watch that show, I'll see it. But I don't. I probably won't. But and maybe I just like Journey Smollett better, but I just would have seen her, and not to replace one light skin girl with another light skin girl. But
I mean, the funny thing about it is that because Journey, I think Journey is more easily identified with black. She's had to go the long route versus a Zendaya, who is black but does not, like, that's not what you see or perceive when you see her. I think she's had a much easier way because I have seen her in several things, and I think that she's a very, very talented actress. I don't know if she's as talented as her career would lead you to believe.
Well, at this point, she did. Normally, they do movies like this to age them so they can get out of that Disney cycle. But this was too much of a jump. She needed a couple more steps in between this to kind of get her to this point. Maybe if she was 30 doing this, opposed to early 20s doing this, it would be more believable because you would see a more lived, natural response to things. It just was very. It felt like.
But then also, like, keep in mind that they never explicitly said anything about her being older.
No, and I know that. I know that part, but it just didn't. To me, that's why I said in the beginning of this one, I wish it was an older couple. because this subject matter would have made more sense to me coming out of somebody.
I disagree.
Older.
I like the age. I liked it because I feel like I've seen that movie where it's the older couple, the mid, the early to mid 30s, early 40s couple. I feel like I've seen that argument play out plenty of times. Right? I think that it's important, especially when you think about, I think, when we talked about the whole the use of the word toxic, I think at its core, it's really about people recognizing certain things. And then once you have recognized certain things, like you start to create plan or action to remedy it, right? So,
and that's why I don't see somebody at that age being able to do
and
that.
I do because of the conversation. And this is where I will say that maybe you were right, or where I will agree with you about the use of the word toxic, because it's and like I disagree.
Don't agree with me because it makes it your point in this moment.
In this moment, it makes me realize that maybe that's the benefit. Is that because everybody has this universal word to describe a universal feeling of feeling this way, it allows younger people a frame of reference to start having these conversations earlier. And if you're having these conversations earlier, then you're developing on a much earlier than generations past, like the tools that you need to deal with those things when they come up. So one of the things,
Journey was still.
Oh, I'm not arguing with you about
age. She would still look about the same age as Zendaya, but I felt like specifically why I said Journey, because her reactions would have been more mature. And for me,
I'd have to go back and watch her reactions because
it just was so. I don't
gotta go back and watch her
reaction. It felt like if this the way it's casted felt like an older man dating a younger girl,
and I didn't get that. Like I got all the shit, it's about to go down. Watching her make his macaroni and cheese in the opening credits, like before we even knew what was going on, it was like, oh shit, like something, she ain't happy. This shit it's about to fly. It's about to pop off in a minute. So, and that was all body language, facial expression. Yeah. So like, I'd have to go back and really kind of like look for that specifically, because like I watched it the one time on Saturday. So
I'm just speaking from a space of how I would have cast it. How I would have.
I mean, like, that makes sense. Because I mean, like, I would have cast Journey too. Like, I ain't even going front. But I would have cast her just because of my, like if I had to pick like the actress that I would prefer in the role, right? But like I don't know if I would have casted her because I didn't think that. Yeah, I liked that they were young, or that they presented young.
It wasn't for me. It wasn't the age for. I would have loved to see an older couple do this, like in my age group, but it would have. And he, like you said, he is that age, but I didn't have an issue with. It felt like it would have. I just needed somebody that could have played off of him better than what I saw her doing. So the idea of this,
I don't know if the script called for her playing off of him. Yeah,
it don't necessarily. I mean, the script is going to be what it is. It's just a flat note, but it's what you add to it, the layers that you put to it. And I just would have. I'm just saying, I could tell somebody was working with her along the way, and that it didn't feel as natural as I would have preferred it to be. That's the only thing, because it when you're dealing with this type of relationship, it makes it who you are at your core comes out in these moments. No matter how good of an actor you are, it comes out naturally. Your response to stuff, and I could tell where a note was giving to be more internal versus literal. I could see that happening. But this was a great film in terms of complicated love, because there was this power struggle over, I want to be chosen, I want to be seen. There was levels of narcissism in it, but ultimately it was one, and he said it. He said it at some point. It was the idea of you wanting me to validate who you are, and you aren't doing that in your own life. Like, I'm not telling you I want you as my arm candy. I want you to want things. And then when it was revealed that she was an actress, she was mad because he didn't choose her. Like, and then she gave him a performance, and he said, "Why didn't you do that in the rehearsal? I mean, the audition." So
she never. But that was the thing. Like he said, that's exactly what he said. But she never actually auditioned, and that was the part where I found the toxicity in her. Right. Yeah. Because there was a lack of communication clearly on her part.
Right.
It's like, if you wanted to be in the film, you should have said that. You were sitting there waiting for him to
give it to her,
to give it to you, or to intuitively know that you even wanted it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's more important. It's like, if I'm dating you, if you and I are dating and you are an actress and I am a writer, director working on my first movie, like, I think that 9 out of 10 people in that situation would have automatically deferred to their significant other. Like, hey,
not necessarily if they take what they do seriously.
And even if you, but when you're dating someone who's just as serious about the craft as you,
and she wasn't,
and that was the point that I was getting ready to make, was that I think 9 out of 10 people in that situation defer to their significant other. Like, maybe not even, and it don't have to be for the lead role, but like, yo, you gonna get in on this? What's up? But there had also been indications that she had stepped away, that she had retired from acting. Right now, like, for me, for instance, like, I pretty much made it clear, like, I haven't been on stage now in probably like 3 years. And most people, I tell them, I'm like, yeah, I've taken time away to do other things. So Nate, if you casting next week and you don't call me or send me something to say, hey, I'm having auditions, like, I can't get upset with you if what I've been putting out there into the atmosphere is that I am not acting at this point right now.
Right.
And I feel like that's what she did.
And was upset when he didn't do it.
And was upset. I also, honestly, like, I feel like we pick and choose where we want to place toxicity.
Well, because it is personal, though. It is personal.
And see, that's why I think that sometimes it can be, that's where my issue with it comes in. It can be problematic. So everybody seems to take issue with the bathroom scene. Everybody wants to say that he was toxic and horrible for what he said to her while she was in the bathtub. But nobody seems to think that what she said to him prior to getting in the bathtub was a problem.
No. Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, and every time somebody says this, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yo, she told this man that he stole her entire life story.
Yeah.
And that was the only reason that he was successful.
Yeah.
And on top of that, she told him that without her, he's just mediocre. And everybody had an issue with his response. Everybody had an issue with his response. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, yo, and see, that's my problem with toxicity, because when you're calling someone else toxic, you tend to forget that you got toxic traits as well.
But I said that.
You did say that. You did say that usually when people are talking about it. But I need people to understand this as a dichotomy, right? Like I need people to see this. And that's my problem with the word, because I think the word has become the problem. And I could be wrong about that. I could be wrong about that. I think that the word is contributing to the problem, because you could have just said what he said was wild and it was hurtful and it was mean. And then I could say to you, well, what she said was hurtful and mean. Yeah. And it was.
It was.
And all he did in the bathroom was respond to her and just made it known that, like, hey, you might think that I just took your life story and ran with it, but let me tell you what I haven't told you before, because that's probably not the best conversation for us in this relationship. But now that you have demeaned my work, right? And not only demean my work, but demean the work that you're also trying to make me feel guilty about the fact that you stood beside me while I created it. And now you want to call it mediocre.
Right. So you've always felt this way. That's not just
either you've always felt this way, or maybe you didn't feel this way and you're trying to be hurtful. And that's my thing. That's my thing. Like whenever, and it does seem to be a little gender bias, whenever men tell the honest truth, we're being angry and resentful and all the things. But it's very possible that she just said those things to him to get a rise out of him, to hurt his feelings, that she didn't really believe that he was mediocre. She doesn't really react to him or respond to him in any way during the movie that would lead me to believe that she actually thinks that she's in a relationship with a mediocre dude, right? But she used the word mediocre, and I think that she knew that it was going to get a rise out of him. So then he comes back and he responds. And really, despite the fact that it was some brutal honesty in that, and what he said, I don't think there's any way you can say things like that and it not be mean. But at the end of the day, if like, hey, since like you think that I just took your shit and ran with it, let me just be clear that this was more than just my relationship with you. And let me spell it out for you. But
I agree with you. I definitely agree.
And I just, that was I think what I was saying about toxicity earlier was really a result of what I've seen people's reaction to this movie. Because it brought very little of what I've heard or read suggests that it was both of them that had some things that were very undesirable as far as like what helps in a healthy relationship. But it was just all thrown on him. It was all thrown on him.
Well, that's the cop out when you're dealing with black men and black women, for him to just take the brunt of the blame. This movie was definitely like a complicated love story that's
why I said we had to add it, because if we talking complicated love stories, I don't think it get more complicated than this.
It really just I think overall as we kind of close out, I think overall and us, you know, taking this word toxic and turning it on its head, the word never changes. People's perspective, people's placement around that word is what changes. And it could, and that's the dangers of the English language. A word can be a weapon and a tool depending on who's holding it. And the idea of toxicity, as we've seen through all of these films, it's really through the eye of the spectator. It has nothing to even do with the people involved. It's how people see it and how I'm seeing it, being in it or outside of it. And just that theme of complicated love, and all these films showed a different perspective and a different viewpoint of it. And it's really us learning how to uh, use words as tools versus as a weapon. Because when it becomes a weapon, I may not even mean what I'm saying to you. I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
So I know how to say things and they come across as angry versus I'm hurt. And this is how I'm feeling. And we have to begin to dig deeper with subject matters like this when defining things. Because the word is not the problem. It's the person using the word that then has the problem. And we've seen throughout all, especially this last one, how individuals' perspective and experience can really change the whole definition of a word, or flip a definition on its head. So this one was a prime example. I believe What's Love Got to Do with It and Queen and Slim were direct connections to what complicated love stories are. And it was I the whole idea of me changing the casting is to just elevate the emotional arcs of it. I think these conversations would have been spicier if there was a stronger female lead or woman lead in this, because she would have been able to get more in depth with emotions and wouldn't have came across as just the victim. I think that's what it would have came off. And subtle details will change that. But I think literally age, will help that. But just experience and reaction and action is important. But I think I like this lineup. I think I've never thought 3.5 hours would be possible. But this was definitely complicated love and and trying to decide that. But I think what I took from this today is this, that word toxic, a weapon or a tool. When you're speaking to somebody, when you're hearing it being used, put it in one of those two categories. And is this person using this as a weapon at this point, or is it a tool?
Right.
And that will help you kind of not hang on just the overuse of the word, because it has to be. It has to be overused because many people didn't have the power to be able to use it to begin with. So now people are going to use it, and they're going to use it for everything. Oh, you gossip. Oh, that's such a toxic person because she gossips. That's true. It's a lot of truth in that. But is it hurting you? Is it doing you bodily harm for that person to gossip? Or are you just tired of hearing it? So this is severity, the level, the perspective. Is it a tool or is it a weapon? That's how I look at stuff now. So I don't dig deep into things. I don't get personal, and that's how I keep my feelings from being hurt in conversations, because I don't take things as seriously as you may see it, because that's your experience. That's not my experience. I'm just listening or commenting. But yeah, this was a great lineup today. I really want to continue with the theme of this, stuff we've seen, stuff we haven't seen, stuff that's new, stuff that's not so new. But just keeping that theme of, and the idea of what Cicely Tyson kind of set the tone for this season, dig deeper. Just because it's not new doesn't make it's not valuable, doesn't make it not necessary. And just keeping that thing that we have going on, I really appreciated it. And it was befitting that it was February.
Absolutely. But we ain't done. So join us next week as we are back. We're going to talk about the Black History biopic.
Yeah.
Films. We're going to talk films about our influential African American leaders and the films that have been made by him, about them. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it with I'm guessing it's going to be our first special guest of the season.
Yeah, we got
one
a
and
special guest coming
only
today.
Baltimore's magical Negro, Miss Tracy Tiggets, is coming on the show next week, y'all. So it's about to get real. So yeah, join us next week as we continue our Black History Month series, and we're talking about the Black History biopic next week.
So continue to like, share, subscribe, comment, all that. We need you. We need you. We're building up this show, and we had an awesome first season, and we want to just top that. And we've already, had two really powerful conversations, episode 1 and 2, and we will keep that momentum going. So continue to, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. And if you want to support us, you see our Cash App is right there at the lower right hand screen. Boot prints. Please share so we can, I can get Georgia a lunch one day or something. Or
I think I still owe you
yeah, you do. I haven't forgot.
Nah, I ain't forgetting either. I didn't forget either. I got you. I got you.
Okay. I got you.
I ain't forget.
So that has been Binge Worthy Podcast, season 2, episode 2. We got more to come. Peace out.
See y'all next week. Yeah, I ain't forget.